Hello, everybody. You are having a crisis. It is I, Krisis with a K, here with your weekly pull list review of every single floppy comic that came out in the American market last week on February 26th. First, let me turn off this guitar amp. Let me see if my toes are dexterous enough to do that. There we go. All right. And to get us off to a flash bang, slam bang start, we're not even going to have a conversation. We're going to go right into my top 25, or not 25, top 10. Maybe it'll reach 25 soon because there's a lot of good comics, but my top 10 comics of 2025. And then I'm going to greet you. We're going to intro. We're going to talk about my moment of crisis. And then we're going to get into every comic that came out this week. So let me just make sure everybody can see and hear me. It seems like that is the case. And let's get to talking. Okay. Here we go. The top 10. Oh, wait, hold on. Because there's what? An important banner that we have to put on the screen. We know that. And that banner is 2025 Comic Series Power Ranking. This is based on my own proprietary algorithm with which I rank every comic and every series that I read. Let's begin. At number 10, we have a new entrant, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles by Jason Aaron and Juan Ferreira. This book is so good. I feel like Jason Aaron is alive again, and I cannot wait to talk about it because it had an issue out this week. Next, Ghost Box. I've been talking about it for a few weeks. I really love it. Mike Carey, Pablo Raimondi, Jose Villaruba. Really great old school Vertigo feeling series. Love Jason Aaron. That's 2 Jason Aarons in my top 10. His Hope Core on Absolute Superman. Of course, James Tynion's Nice House by the Sea, illustrated by Alvaro Martinez Bueno and Jordi Belair. Batman Dark Patterns, which I never remembered to put the cover in the list, but this lets me tell you it's by Dan Waters, Hayden Sherman, Triona Farrell, and letters by Frank Sedovec. Really great mystery early Batman, year 1.5. Still loving McKay's Avengers as illustrated by Fareed Karani. Jason Aaron with 3 books in the top 10. Who is this? Has Krisis been replaced with a Skrull? It's Bug Wars, number 1 with art from Madman Oswar, Matthew Wilson with letters by Becca Carey. Number 3, The Power Fantasy by Kieran Gillen, Casper Wingard, and Clayton Cowles. Number 2, One World Under Doom by Ryan North, R.B. Silva, and David Curiel. But we have back at number 1 because there was a new issue this week and I freaking loved it. FML by Deconic Lopez, Peter, and Cowles. This comic speaks directly to my heart. Okay. So how about that? 3 Jason Aaron comics in my personal top 10. Who would have ever thought that day would arrive? Certainly not I, because I've spent years trashing Jason Aaron. But you know what? Goes to show you, give everybody another chance occasionally until they have hurt you so much that you just can't give any more chances. Let me just say hello to everybody that's in the comments. I like to just say like a hi to each individual person, if I can, that are here at the beginning of the stream. And then I'll continue to chat with you throughout the stream. I'll tell you, it is shaping up to be a very hot one in Wellington today, which means like 25°C. It's not that hot, but for me and all this hair, it's hot. And you know what? I'm going to be cursing it when it's gone and we're to the frigid days and you start seeing me show up in the blazers and the sweaters because it also gets pretty cold in Wellington. So let's say who is here. Super Panda, who is going to miss a lot of this, but chimed in early to say that they are on the closing shift today. Thank you for taking the time to tell me that. A Fifth of Jack Gaming, who's got a great channel. He is on the list of friends of Crushing Krisis on my channel if you want to go check it out. And he wants to know if we're going to have a little positive crisis in our lives. Well, that really depends on the comics that came out this week. I'm certainly going to be negative on some of them, but I do think I have some positive things to say. Neil Pereira saying, good morning, everyone. Tim Burnham, who I had so much fun with on Near Mint Condition this week because we on Thursday night US got to talk about the best Daredevil stories of all time, and I think it was our best evergreen of all time. And Tim is one of the biggest Daredevil fans I've ever met. It was so fun to do a video with him. I've known Tim for over a decade online, and it was just such a pleasure. The way that you all are used to me talking about X-Men, he has that encyclopedic knowledge of Daredevil. Please go check it out if you haven't seen it already. I think it's one of the best ones we've ever done. Bunkmaster B, no toxic positivity though, only the non-toxic, safe to eat positivity, regardless of how good the comics are. Bunk usually chimes into the middle and then he has a very active social calendar. So then he goes away for a while and then he comes back at the end and expresses shock that I'm still streaming at the end of the stream. James Abel, my frequent partner in crime, but you know, maybe not partner in marriage. We are in couples counseling about our frequent disagreements about comic books. He read 17 new comics this week. I read over 50 new ones. Actually, the pull list this week, just on numbers, was supposed to be 66, but that's before I count for things that were delayed, things that I wound up dropping when I started catching up on them, and things that were not out. digitally, only out physically. So we'll see how many I wound up having. Cruel Angel, just 6 for you. You know what? 6 comics a week is over 300 comics right a year. That's still a lot of comics. You're reading almost a comic a day. I think we could get that number up to 7. Maybe just read one older comic. I'm looking for 365 comics read this year. Cruel Angel, do you think we can get there? And I see what they're talking about, what comics they read this week, Seasons 2 being one of them. That is a comic we will talk about today. Nick N saying, happy Sunday, everyone. Happy Monday to everyone else who's not in the U.S., such as this one here. Tiger Eyes just finished Dust to Dust number 3. You may have noticed Dust to Dust no longer in my top 10 this week. So maybe I had some mixed feelings too, or maybe the other comics were just that darn good. Nick N reminding us the Oscars are tonight. I am an addict of Oscar speeches, even though I don't think I've seen a single movie that is nominated for the Oscars this year. A few I do want to see, but boy, will I watch those speeches because I love an Oscar speech. Stephen Patterson saying good evening. Javier Hernandez saying, hey, y'all. Rexmo, always good to see you, saying hello. And Logan Wayne, who's been commenting on a few of the shows I've been on the past couple of days. Hello to Krisis and the Crushing Krisis crew, the CKC. I don't know, we got to workshop that. I think y'all need a name, right? Like, because there's like Minties and what is Jess called? The Omni Dog's Vault. Vaulters, pole vaulters. I never know. I have to ask him every time. Hope I'm having a good day. Is my makeup team fixing my Elektra hair again? So if you saw that Daredevil stream on Near Mint Condition, I had really big hair volume to begin with that day because it's been a little bit humid for Wellington. And so I said, what if we just go all the way and I just do full Marco Cicchetto. I'm Italian, but I don't have any C's in my name, so I don't know. Full Elektra hair. And at the beginning of the show, the hair it looked like a Cicchetto illustration. Over time, it kind of reduced a little bit, but we just went for my normal silhouette. I always like having a little bit of bump in the front because it changes the shape of my head. So I always like at least like 1.5 inches of hair here, but it was much, much bigger on the Daredevil show. Let's see, anybody else? Max, who is my frequent thought partner over the weekends as we both rush to read all of the Marvel comics out in a week. Max and I had a little disagreement about one of the comics out this week. Bunkmaster is having that Shadowland was chosen by multiple internet personalities as an evergreen D&D title. Well, it didn't D&D. I see DD and I read it as D&D. Shadowland didn't, well, I'm not going to spoil it. Shadowland was nominated and voted for on the Daredevil show, but you will have to go and watch the show in your mint condition to see. And I think it's the best evergreen show we've ever done. I think it's the best evergreen list we've ever had. So I'm very, very proud. Hello to Chris Brogan. Hello, my friend Samantha Jane, who I got to be live on camera with for the first time this weekend on a Kiwi takeover of, that was bad, of Omnidog's Vault, where we explained many Kiwi customs to him. And then Samantha Jane yesterday ran the Round the Bays race in Auckland and crushed it. And then later this week, we are going to conspire to listen to the new Lady Gaga album together. JT Wolf's Library chucked a sickie from work. So happy to hang out live this morning. Chucked a sickie from work. That you can't be from the United States. This stream has been a must watch for me during the week when I get a chance. That is so incredibly kind. I've been hearing from a lot of people actually who are saying, I watch you in installments throughout the week if that's okay. I'm like, hell yes, that's okay. I say all the time, I very rarely watch anything for longer than 15 or 20 minutes. Call that ADHD, call that how busy my life is. So if you're watching this in installments, that's great. And that's why after the first 24 hours, I put the chapter markers in. So if there's certain books you want to like skip ahead to or see, that you can. Pity Ma, one of our regular friends, saying, hey all. Saz Murph, whose name I always love to see. FML has a bear on it. I should read it barely. I don't remember what the bear had anything to do with anything, if I'm being honest. I think it might be foreshadowing, but it was a fantastic comic. James, the Media Master, saying, hey, all. Hayden, my friend, greetings from Scotland. Love to all. I will not do my Scottish accent so as not to offend Hayden, although I think it's one of my better ones. Larry's Library, who was also on the D&D show. Larry has the most impeccable taste in comics, and I love when people are surprised by him, because I think that a lot of people think he's going to be like all Bronze Age comics all the time, and then he'll go hard for something new that just delights him, and his taste is so good. I don't think I've put him yet on my Friends of Crushing Krisis strip on the channel, but I will as soon as the show's over, because Larry is most certainly a friend of Crushing Krisis and has outstanding taste. Case saying hello, good afternoon, evening from the East Coast of the United States. Michael Wesleyus, wait, I can do that better. Mikkel Wesleyus saying just in time after a short weekend break in Belgium. Short weekend break in Belgium. And Jean-Remy Agueta saying, if I'm talking about my hair during the D&D stream, it was amazing. I wish I could have hair as elegant as yours. Well, I think what I've learned from looking at Marco Cicchetto's illustrations is It's not about perfect curls. Like sometimes for this show, I'm like, ooh, I want to see the little ring notes. No, the Elektra hair is like a cloud. And in fact, there is Marco Kiketo hair in this stream today that we'll be talking about. And so we can compare and contrast when we get there. Tiago Pessoa saying, I can't get his comment to come up on the screen. Hello to Krisis and all. And also our very good friend and frequent commenter who also has outstandingly good taste, Lance McNair. Oh, and I see one more name I haven't said hello to yet, Martian Pilgrim. Quite challenging to get this live. Second time to view the live show. Ready for my hot takes. Well, they could be hot, cold, lukewarm, or meteoric. We just don't know until I start ranting. But thank you for stopping by. I always love to see you masked with your giant, I think it's a plushie infinity gauntlet in that picture. Always very, very charming. So if you haven't watched this show before, welcome, although it seems like a lot of you have. We already did my top 10 comics of 2025. I'm going to have a brief moment of crisis where I just rant about something extemporaneously, which some of you may agree with or not. Then I will take some of your reactions to that and also get any AMAs you have for me. Could be about my comic reading, could be about New Zealand, could be about the Oscars, for which I've watched none of the films, so I'd be purely speculating. And then we're going to get into my 1-minute reviews. World famous, let's say. My world famous. I mean, I'm in New Zealand and most of you are somewhere else, so I think we could safely call them world famous. 1-minute reviews of comic books that were out this week. Okay, so I guess that means it is time for a moment of crisis. Gosh, what am I going to talk about? There's this axiom. And you know, axiom is one of those words that people use and then nobody defines for you. And I don't know if everybody knows what it means. An axiom is a statement, I'm going to read the definition, that is so evident or well established that it is accepted without controversy or question. And in an axiom that I've frequently heard about comics, but it was new to me to hear probably in the last year or two, is the idea that in comic books, space is importance. So what does that mean? It means because comic books have limited page real estate and comic books don't exist in the fourth dimension of time, that the amount of space that is given to something on a page often denotes its importance. That doesn't mean the most space always is the most important, but of course a full page splash always tells us that a moment is really important. It could also be the cadence of how the space is used, right? So a lot of little inset panels showing Hawkeye drawing back the bow, his fingers notching, him adjusting down and then releasing, that also takes up space on the page. And the way that a page uses space guides our eye, and it also dictates how much time we're going to spend on the page. So a splash page denotes a lot of importance, but we don't necessarily spend a lot of time on it unless it's stocked with lots of word balloons, whereas a lot of small things on a page denote less importance, but they slow us down. So space denotes importance kind of in either direction, right? The direction of making us spend more time or less time, but it tends to tell us where to focus because comics don't narrate to us. They can't be physically loud. They cannot take up time, right? I've been thinking about this as it relates to my big complaint of recent weeks about books that are starting with 5 and 6 issue story arcs. We have one of them we're going to be talking about near the top of the order today, Absolute Wonder Woman, which finished up its first 5 issue story arc, and I am exhausted. I started with such love for this title, and I love all the creators on it. I love Kelly Thompson. She's probably my favorite writer in comics. I got to issue 5 and I was exhausted. And I feel like that about several comics we're going to be talking about today, including the season's number 2. And I was thinking about that in terms of the axiom of space connoting importance. And I was thinking about how that changed in the past 25 years of comics. Everybody talks about Brian Hitch as the person who introduced this kind of widescreen version of comics. You'll hear me reference it constantly, just saying that sentence in shorthand. It's one of my axioms. What does that mean? Well, when Brian Hitch started drawing things like The Authority and Ultimates back in the early 2000s, he really started doing this filmic thing where he had page-wide establishing shots, sometimes a whole page of wide. If you go back to the 90s or the 80s and look for pages that have page-wide establishing panels, it is not very common. And the times that it happens, it tends to really be an establishing shot. I always think of this one of Mr. Sinister fighting the Dark Riders because it's one of my favorite panels of all times. It's meant to show you all the action and ground you in the space. It wasn't just used all the time. So the idea for something to be full width and take up that much depth in the page was relatively new, but it was hugely successful, and it defined how a lot of people began drawing comics in the early 2000s, because as these these pencilers were putting more and more detail, they wanted kind of more and more space, and they were trying to give you a very cinematic experience, and it was contributing to the resurgence of comics. And one of the results of that was that we entered the trade paperback era. I call the trade paperback era, that is not like the Copper Age or Bronze Age, it's just something I refer to as starting somewhere between 2004 and 2006, where most big titles were expected to be released in trade paperback, and there was that expectation they were going to come out. And so then people started writing for trade. They started writing 4 to 6 issue arcs that would tell a complete story that would be satisfying as a book. So it's really interesting in my mind to see how that space connotes importance axiom transfers, because it used to just be a general axiom of like, watch what you're giving the most panel time to and the most panel space to. Then it became artists kind of announcing their own importance and the importance of the art in the storytelling. But then that transitioned to saying, well, comics themselves need to take up this much space, 4 to 6 issues and a 100+ page trade paperback, because comics are important to read, right? And that's really interesting. And I think it hugely revived the industry that we all know and love. But now we are 20 years after the birth of the trade era, and there's still this idea that comics are so important, they need to take up space. And artists feel that way too. There's a lot of artists who do that kind of big paneling, artists who I don't think necessarily have the art quality to be doing that big paneling or the storytelling consistency. Because when you have so few panels on the page and they're all effectively establishing shots, you have to be very good at showing action. And the way that action is shown, you have to make a decision about. When Spider-Man shoots a web shooter, we can all think of what it looks like when Tom Holland does that, but what does it look like in the comic book? Do we just see his hand coming out? Do we see him aiming? Do we see the web starting to come out? Do we actually see the web already in midair? Would we rather see the web impact the villain? Those are many choices, and the choice that you make has to do with the pace of the story and the action that you're showing to the viewer. And when you're only doing a few super wide panels, you have less and less choices. Whereas back in the day, you might see several iterations of that web traveling and the results of Spider-Man webbing up the villains. Which brings me back to today and my exhaustion with these long arcs. I feel like that importance that space connoted to comic stories and early in this trade era has turned into a self-importance, where comics think they must take up that much time to tell a story because that's what readers expect. But the problem is, once we get stuck in that kind of rhythm, it's not always good for comics anymore. It's not always good for readers anymore. It's just a habit. And I think that comics right now are very much in a habit of taking up space and assuming that's important. And when I look at a lot of the titles we're going to talk about today, we're on a 4th issue that's kind of stringing along a story arc, or a 3rd or 2nd, and I'm just not excited. I want to see a complete story, a complete thought, even if it's part of an arc. And I find that I am gravitating more and more towards comics that can tell one complete thought in an issue, even if it's part of an overarching story. Part of why FML is my #1 comic right now is that it is absolutely telling an arc, but every story feels like such a capsule of time, such a thing I can appreciate all on its own, that I really like it. And if you look across my top 10, almost every book in my top 10 are books that are telling 1 and 2 issue stories and not necessarily 5 and 6 issue stories. So I don't really have a conclusion. I've just been thinking about how space connotes importance, and that over time, comics have become self-important. And now, how do we change that definition of importance? Can you tell these 1 and 2 issue stories while still using that widescreen Brian Hitch-derived approach to comic paneling? Or have we gone so far over the rainbow that now we actually have to have a lot more panels on the page? I think you can still tell a comic book efficient story in 1 or 2 issues, still showing some of that widescreen view. And I think a lot of my favorite comics are doing that. But I think it's something that a lot of writers and artists probably could put a little bit more thought into, because right now with these comics at $4 a piece, with trade paperbacks moving towards $30 sometimes, we are really making decisions not only about our time and how important that is, but also with our dollars. And I just don't think the standard 6-issue story arc wins the argument every time the way that it used to. And that is today's Moment of Krisis. Always extemporaneous. Never know what I'm saying until long after I have said it. I'm going to go and check what your responses are to that, but also I'm going to put up the banner for Ask Me Anything. You can ask a few questions, but y'all, I'm committed. We are getting to the pull list portion of this by not 26 minutes into the show today, which means I have 5.5 minutes to do all of this business. And so let's get to business. Let's see if anybody had anything to say about this time is space thing. Frank Miller Used to be great at doing more with less, says Ryan Wilson. So much emotion in his art, but not a lot of background stuff. That's another thing. I think that there are some artists who know, and if you look back at Wolverine #1 from 1982 by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller, there are some of those widescreen panels, and you will look, and those panels are not super detailed, but Frank Miller chooses the right moments of action to show to carry you through the page, which means he doesn't need as many panels. So it's not like Brian Hitch invented it out of whole cloth. He just popularized the idea of every comic book doing that. The Chuck Dixon YouTube channel is great for comic history and info. He mentions how editorial messed with storytelling because they were forced to write for trades in the 2000s because that became a marketing thing that was a requirement. I've definitely seen some creators even today being interviewed on channels like Near Mint Condition saying, well, I have to turn in 4-issue story arcs or 6-issue story arcs because that's what the trade will be. And if you look across Marvel trades on a solicit show like the one we'll be doing on Near Mint Condition on Thursday, Marvel trades almost always are 6-issue trades unless they are of a miniseries that are 4 or 5 issues, whereas DC actually allows a lot more elasticity. They'll do an 8 or 9 issue trade. Marvel very, very rarely does that unless it's a series like Gods that is deliberately 8 issues long. DC definitely gives a little bit more slack on the leash to their creators to decide on the lengths of their stories. Nick N says, I wish we'd do away with the TPB era. I think it's hindering continuity and long-term stories. I 100% agree. Beyond Comics, who is the other Kiwi that I got to broadcast with live on Omnidog's Vault on our Saturday, your Friday, but it was a special Batter Days because it was Saturday for us in New Zealand, so I got to meet Liam live on camera. Jean Remy saying, totally agree. I recently started making my way through my old Vampirella archives, which will be coming out in paperback starting in a couple of months if you've never picked up the hardcovers. The hardcovers are glorious. And seeing how much space is used in these magazines compares to the comics nowadays is a noticeable difference. I actually have one comic today I'm going to be talking about that made me specifically think of that. So Jean Remy, I'll be interested if you're still around when I get there. It's only in the it's in the S's. So you're heading back to work. You'll catch it on repay. Brain Tissue Paper, I've not got to say hello to you today. Hello. Missed the transition from writing to trade, so coming back to comics now, I find the pacing a bit odd. It's a lot slower than what I was used to and takes 5 issues just to get to the point. And that's the thing, like I think that sometimes there are stories that don't necessarily request or require 5 issues that still are taking 5 issues. George Chimchimov saying Ultimates is great at doing one and done at the moment in Marvel. Yeah, the current Ultimates, which by the way, still uses a lot of these widescreen panelings, proving the point that you do not need to go back to lots of tiny panels in order to tell a one and done story. It can be done with some of these broad filmic panels. That's still in my top 20. I really might have to start doing a top 20 instead of a top 10 because there's so many good books, but I'm like, then that takes 2 minutes. I have to make a new timer that counts down from 120 seconds. A lot of machinery. Saz Murph saying, Krisis, I'm hitting up one of my issues with Brian Malcolm Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man. I enjoyed the series, but that is where I noticed every story is part of a multi-issue arc and didn't see single issue stories. Yeah, Bendis, who is talented in many ways, and I appreciate as a creator and sometimes also as a person, sometimes more as a person than a creator. Bendis is not good at writing one and done issues. He's always got to tickle the ivories of the next issue. But at the same time, Bendis sometimes doesn't do a traditional story arc. He just does this thing where some things happen in an issue and then he tickles a little bit, and then some things happen in the next issue and it tickles a little bit, and you start to lose track of like, what did you even read? That was my experience reading his New Avengers. It's not so much in arcs. There's a lot of one-offy issues, but they always are like, and this continues. To me, that always makes me think of J.J. Abrams' Alias, the TV show, which we revere in this household, because Alias, you can never just think of one episode, because every episode ends with a cliffhanger. The first 10 minutes of the next issue resolves that cliffhanger, and then there's a story in that episode, but then it starts teeing up the next cliffhanger. And so it's like this idea of continuous entertainment, which reads really well in trade and also keeps you really hooked, but is it satisfying on an issue by issue level? As a reminder, you can also ask me anything, but when I get to that 26-minute mark, we're going to start in thoughts on Brian Ferry. Well, my first thought is I'm going to need to Google Brian Ferry. Brian Ferry, he's an English singer and singer-songwriter who wrote Don't Stop the Dance. Roxy Music. Roxy Music, I think, is where he is known from. I'm seeing. Roxy Music is on this big list of glam rock that I have to listen to more of. To me, so often glam rock is just David Bowie and Iggy Pop and Lou Reed, that I found that I would say that I like glam rock so much. I didn't even know that much about glam rock. I didn't even know that much Roxy Music or Brian Eno or all these other glam rock artists that there's a litany of. And also I know T-Rex, right? So I actually have a huge glam rock list to listen to, which I'll probably listen to at some point this year. But right now I'm deep into my jazz right now. I'm having a jazz month. Nick N, some series only put out 5 issues into a trade. Nowadays it's getting worse. Agreed. Bunkmaster B, you mentioned my D&D game a few times. Oh, this is an AMA. What edition are we playing? Am I DMing or playing a character? Oh, Bunk, I could talk about this for hours, but let me see if I can give it in 30 seconds. We had a D&D group in college, and this would have been in like early 2000s, that only probably met not even a dozen times. And then we went and did other stuff, and, you know, life got in the way. And we're all from theater. We always said we were going to get back together. And one of the members of the group, an incredibly talented musician, one of my best friends, Dante Bucci, who you can still find on Spotify, passed away quite suddenly due to an accident. And we were all bereft and grieving. And to this day, I actually still grieve and think about him almost every day. But we got back together to play D&D again. And then we went another 10 years. And right before the pandemic started happening, there was talk of getting together to do like another one shot as an anniversary session of our original, I think, get together to play D&D. And because the pandemic happened like a week after that, the lockdown started, we just were like, well, we're all in our house anyway. We might as well keep playing remotely. So we've now been in the same campaign since 2000. It was actually 5 years ago, like last week. So we just had our 5-year anniversary. It's all on campaign. We're playing D&D 5e. We all refuse to go to 5.5. We're sticking with standard 5 because I have every 5 book, and so do a few of the other people. It started out with our classic college DM, but I actually filled in for him once and discovered that I love it. And so we take turns DMing about 8 months each, and we swap off. And then sometimes we do little one-shot stories, which I've loved because I bring in all of my comic loves and tools into it. Like I do crazy time travel stuff. I do them interacting with themselves in the past. I do them going into bubble realities. To me, I'm writing a comic book. And I've also done like big campaigns. I designed this whole city with a whole system of how to gain status in the city. Each character had their ID cards, and lights would light up on the ID cards as they did more stuff. I really, really like really big, deep, immersive stories. But we do use a couple of elements from actual 5e continuity. And that's why I've never been comfortable like posting any of the stories or character world building online, because I do rely on some things from 5e, which I wouldn't do if I did it all from scratch again. Specifically, it's kind of loosely based on the plot of Storm King's Thunder. But there are whispers that we might do a live play with some members of the Near Mint family. I can't say who, I can't say when. I think I would have to probably practice doing it once with them not live broadcasted in order to have the guts to be live playing as a DM streaming. But that might happen before the end of this year. It's getting so high on my priority list, it's almost a bucket list item at this point. Wow. Well, that took a long time, but it's something I love. Lance J. McNair, is there a comic book superhero team that you have next to no interest in? Well, I would have said the Avengers back in the day. You know, for me, it's kind of the Thunderbolts, and I do enjoy a Thunderbolt comic. I really liked it last week, but because I was gone by 1997 when they started, then when I caught up in like 2011, I remember reading all of like the 2000s era Thunderbolts, and I just didn't get it. I was like, what's the point? Why do I like these characters? Because I'd never read the original Kurt Busiek run. So I like tolerate them, and I still get excited for Songbird and seeing some of the ones from like the original crew, like Moonstone or whoever, but I just don't, in my gut, I don't really have a connection with them. I would say the same for Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol happened off to the side of my reading in the 90s, so I never read the Vertigo stuff, and I've never read the Silver Age stuff, although now I have it on my shelf somewhere. Here it is. In the new DC Finest edition. So I've read through the issues for a guide, but I've never like read the issues. So I'm really excited. But yeah, I have no affection for Doom Patrol. So when they show up in something and people are like, it's Doom Patrol, I don't really have anything there. James, the Medium Answer, saying, I agree that we need more one and done stories. George Chimchimov saying Gods is 8 issues long as if the first Swan wasn't as big as costly as number 2. Oh, right. Meaning the first issue of Gods was like $10. It was like practically an image trade. And it was like 64 pages. So, but Marvel's not going to give you the amount of value that Image is going to give you for $10. They're just never going to. Ryan Wilson saying, I feel like writers are taking a 1-issue story and turning it into 3 or more issues, which really dilutes the comics. I agree. I think editors probably contribute to that. Tiger Eyes agreeing with me. The Alias, the TV show, is the best. XXS doesn't like coffee ice cream. Great deep cut. That episode. Okay. Martian Pilgrim saying Alias. Yes. Okay. Lots of Alias fans love this. Ryan Wilson. Another problem is I feel like a lot of modern comics only take like 5-10 minutes to read. Oh, huge problem. Huge problem that pisses me off. I time how long I spend on every single comic book. And I can tell you my average comic reading per week, actually, if I can move this. So for example, this week, my average read per issue was 6 minutes and 57 seconds. And that's very consistent. Last minute was 6 minutes and 50. The week before, 6:56. The weeks before, 6:24. I very, very rarely have a week that I spend more than 8 minutes on average per issue. But there are some comics that take me that long to read. And I always appreciate a comic that takes 10 minutes or longer to read, even in the modern day, unless it's bad. Then I don't appreciate it. Max Album, oh my lord, you need to Google Brian Ferry Roxy Music. Roxy Music is just not one of my primary references, Max. It's like, what if I said, you know, I don't know, Louise Post. Does everybody know who Louise Post is? No, but she's one of my primary references. Loved Alias, Crushing Harden, Jennifer Garner, Lance McNair saying used to love Alias, but it got frustrating later and showcased a lot of what annoys me about J.J. Abrams' storytelling. Yeah, he got into mystery box mode later as the series rolled on. Okay, I'm at the 30-minute mark. I'm just going to really quick see if there's any more AMAs. Talk to me about New Zealand. Is it old world villages, sprawling cities? Well, look, I've only ever been on the North Island, which we established on that talk show. You should actually just go and watch Omnidog's Waltz show from this weekend, the Substitute Batter Days. That was the New Zealand invasion, because we talked about a lot of New Zealand stuff. We talked about New Zealand food, New Zealand birds, Te Reo Maori, which is one of the official languages of New Zealand. But I live near Wellington, which is the capital, but it's kind of like this. It's a very small, compressed city that feels just like one little tiny pie slice of San Francisco, kind of. And then it's kind of just suburbs sprawling out from that. There's only a few big cities. Auckland is probably the only city in New Zealand that you would recognize as like a United States size city. And on the North Island between Wellington and Auckland, I hope not to offend anybody, but there's not a lot of big cities. There are cities, but I've been through some of them, and some of the downtowns of these cities are like a 4-block stretch, and then that's it. And that's kind of just residential. JT White Wolf Library, thoughts on Rainbow Ralph, She-Hulk Omni, buy it. It's so great. It was one of my favorite Marvel series, if not my favorite Marvel series of last year. It's charming. It's very slice of life. It's not a big punch up, but she tells a complete story. There are arcs. There is character development. The interior art is just so good. The voice for She-Hulk is so good. I think it's the best She-Hulk series of all time, actually. But read it on Marvel Unlimited. I don't know if it's bombastic enough that you need an omnibus of it, but I am very happy it got an omnibus. Okay, let's see if there are any other questions. Larry Library is schooling me on glam rock. I will have to tag into him sometimes later for that. Okay, I think I made it to the end of the questions, only 6 minutes later than I said I was going to. I guess my question to all of you in the chat, because you're like my regular friends here in the chat, but also people who are watching after, is this a good idea that it takes until 30 minutes for me to like start the actual thing that we do of the show? Are you like, oh, maybe the AMA should move further in? I know I ask this all the time. I'm an inexorable A student, and I constantly want to validate that, my PDF isn't working. I'm always looking to validate that my work is working, I guess is the answer there. Okay, possibly the covers PDF is not working. That's going to be a problem. Okay, the credits PDF is working. Let's try one more time for the covers PDF. No, nothing. Oh, maybe I was too zoomed in. What? No, something's very wrong. All right, well, I'm going to have to regenerate the PDF, so that's going to take a moment. We're going to delete that one. Let me just make sure this actually kicks off as I need it to kick off, and then we will talk more. Because I can't just do it straight from the images. That will be not good. Okay. Quick actions. Create. You know, I seem to remember this back from when I did this show years and years and years ago, that if there's the PDF is too big, it just won't generate. But hey, that means we can look at a couple more comics. I said comics instead of comments. Drink your first drink, even if you're drinking tea. JT White Wolf Library says comics are a lot quicker now with more media becoming more disposable. But also, in my opinion, from the older comics I've read, there's a lot of super unnecessary narration and dialogue. Yeah, for me, the sweet spot is the 80s because they're not as over narrated, but they're still narration. I do like a nice narration. I think one of the positives of the comic book format is that it can be narrated. Like, that's a good thing. It's different than just a book because we can see some of the images, but it's different than a movie, which wouldn't always have pervasive voiceover, especially not narrator voiceover. If there's voiceover in a movie, narrators are very, very rare now. It's usually one of the characters narrating the action as a voiceover, and their thoughts are later told. So I get very frustrated when modern comics refuse to use that tool. It's one of the major tools that are available to you in comics. Like, use the tools. So, but I agree that things are a lot wordier now. All right, let me see what's going on here. So view, single page, I was bragging how I was ready early. Oh, okay, it's not totally broken. Here we go. Okay, I think we got it. It's just so big. view that some of the pages are not showing. It's this one page. Hold on. View. I know this is no fun, but there's only so many things I can do at once. Okay. Sidebar. Thumbnails. There we go. Okay. It's just this one comic that is being a problem. Okay. There we go. When we get there, we will just get there. Hide sidebar. All right. Now we can begin. Thank you so much for waiting during that brief technical adjustment. Now, I actually have some things to start with that are not the comics from this week, because last week I missed or skipped a few, and there are also some other comics recently that I just did not get to that I wanted to get to. So we are going to do a few of those, and then I will get your comments, and then we will keep rolling through. There are so many comics to talk about today. So this is actually a series from last week, and I wasn't reading it, but I kind of meant to. And the reason why is I've been enjoying a lot of these older Batman series, not older, but series showing kind of earlier in Batman's career. And so I thought I would take a chance, since this is Mark Waid and Chris Samney, who did Black Widow together, and colored by Lopez. What is the first name there? Matthew Lopez, and later letters by Clayton Cowles. So I thought I would take a chance and read it. And actually, I'm really enjoying it. And this is why. I've said this before. I really like the use of Robin really, really early in the first year of Robin, because he's so playful. He's such a scamp. He came right from the circus, and he's dealing with the trauma of his parents' death. And I think if you're reading 1940s comics that have Robin, or even 1960s comics that have Robin, they don't hit that beat as well. And you kind of, they're just using him as a character, but they're not using his character. And that's why I really like this. This is actually a really fun story. It's basically about the first case that Batman lets Robin ride along on, but at the same time, Robin is being looked into by social services to make sure Bruce is being a good parent to Dick. It's also, you know, got some household drama of Alfred trying to explain to Bruce that, like, Dick is not the same kid as him. And that really appeals to me, because they've been through the same trauma. So Bruce thinks it's going to be the same to parent Dick as it was to parent him. And I really resonate with that, because I'm always saying, oh, Kid Krisis is just like me. I should parent her just like I wanted to be parented. But just because you share some common traits with your kid does not mean you should parent them just how you wanted to be parented. They're their own individual. And I think Mark Waid is doing something really fun with that here. And Chris Samney, I think, somehow makes Waid's retcon plots more substantial. So I actually really, really enjoy this. I binged it all this morning. The art is, of course, gorgeous, Chris Samney, but I actually really highly recommend it, and I'm really actually loving it a lot. So this is called Eule's Vision, and it was a comic that is an indie comic that I could not find digital anywhere, so I reached out to the creators, and they actually gave me review copies. So anytime I get a free review copy specifically from a creator, I will always let you know that, because it may influence my opinions about the comic. So this is, it started out as a Kickstarter comic, I believe, but now they're releasing the amassed story. And it's got such big ideas, which I love. I feel like sometimes indie comics, the idea isn't big enough. And I think it's got some of the chops to really communicate it. It's this very Batman-esque woman who, you know, her parents died or her family died. She leaves this Gotham-esque city, but she comes back because she's this tech-enabled superhero, but there's also a hint of supernatural. And the city is plagued by supernatural forces, which she knows, but she didn't necessarily want to get entangled with again. The art is pretty strong. The coloring is pretty strong, but I want to point out the lettering here. And unfortunately, I do have to kind of tag it on the lettering, because I just think that, like, this purple lettering right on the panel, and they do this a lot throughout the issue, it kind of takes you out of the quality of the lettering, because most real professional comic books would not do that. It's really interesting how much you don't notice lettering until you do notice lettering. Lettering is one of those things, like being a native speaker of a language, where the native speaker will do things in that language that the person who learned it from a book may not realize to do. I think lettering is the same. So this is a comic that I think almost really feels like it could be at an indie publisher, but the lettering so often takes me out of it. But I love how big the idea is. I love that they're, like, going for this huge supernatural operatic Batman origin type of story. I'm into that. But I just think that if the lettering was a little clearer, I would have an easier time reading it. I'm going to keep reading it. If they, I guess, keep giving me review copies, of course I will buy it when it becomes available digitally, or when it shows up on Global Comics. Last week, I forgot to talk about Let This One Be a Devil, which is by James Tynion and Steve Fox, with art by Peter Kowalski, colors from Brad Simpson, and letters from Tom Napolitano. I found that this was okay. I wasn't like super, super excited by it. It's one of these like, was it a real spooky thing that happened or was it not, that Tynion likes to do? And it's about this very small town in like, I guess maybe it was even 1800s America, where there's maybe a devil preying on the town. It was fine. I really like Peter Kowalski's art. I think maybe he was one of the artists on Violator Origins, but it's just nothing about it particularly hooked me. And I think this is the same problem. It's not a Tynion problem. It's the same problem I have at Zenescope. If you're going to do a one and done folklore derived horror story, and I don't know if this is continuing to a second issue or not, which is part of the problem. It ended so ambiguously that I wasn't even sure if it was meant to be a cliffhanger. I think you got to do a lot more to like excite me with these one and done horror stories. If you don't excite me enough, it's like, why does this exist? This took so much effort to do. Why did you put the effort in? Why did this story need to be told? Also from last week, I just ran out of time last week. If you remember last week, I really went down to the wire and was like running to get on screen. So this is the last book I was going to read, and it's got pink on the cover, so I wanted to read it. It's The Loose End from Hard Case Crime. It's written by David Dwanch with art from Travis Himmel and colors from Geraldo Filo and letters by Dave Dwanch, the writer. This guy knows how to letter really, really well. I liked this. It was it's about this down in his luck gambling screenwriter guy, which I feel like we've seen 100 comics about him before in all of his many forms. He's got one famous friend who's an actor. The friend invites him to a getaway with like a big movie mogul guy as his +1, thinking he's doing him a favor, like maybe you're going to break in and at least you won't gamble all weekend. But there's a mob boss that he's into for money that wants him to do something completely different on the trip. I think it was very stylish. I think it was easy to follow. The lettering was actually really good, so I'm kind of surprised to see now that the lettering's by the writer. Maybe he's originally a letterer. I like the colors. I like this page layout. It's really fun. He's at the blackjack table. He is the dealer popping out of the chip. Really cute and fun. A lot of little moments like that in the issue. I think it did enough to get me to read an issue 2. I'm interested to see what now, once they go on this vacation, what it's going to be like. Is it going to be slapstick? Is it going to be really bloody? Like, is it going to be more Weekend at Bernie's, or is it going to be more The Hangover? I don't know. So I think they got me for one more issue because I'm just curious to see what kind of tone it takes on. I think if it goes a little bit funny and he winds up being terrible at it, I'm going to be more interested than if it gets like super bloody, I suspect. Also, since DSTLRY, I mean, Dust Larceny, I mean, Diabolical Realty, I mean, Distillery, announced that they are now offering all of their digital back issues and you can easily buy them on their site, which news that was breaking news here because they actually came into the comments to tell me after I bitched about it in one of my moments of crisis. I went back and got to read the series I really wanted to read, which is Time Waits by Chip Zdarsky and the David Brothers with art from Marcus Toe, colors by Matt Wilson, and lettered by Ariana Maher. I mean, what a pedigree. Oh my goodness. This comic is amazing. I love timey-wimey stories. Movies like Looper or Primer, movies that are about like moving forward and backward in time and being afraid of if you're going to affect your own timeline, but then maybe getting stuck in a timeline you didn't mean to be in. This has all of that, and it's so intelligently done. It's about this guy that maybe was on some kind of time police force, but now he's in our present day. But is he supposed to stay in our present day? Who is he pretending to be in our present day? Do they want to get him back? It's only 3 issues. It's incredibly, incredibly satisfying and incredibly gorgeous. I think some of the best art that I have ever seen from Marcus Toe. It just feels like it had a lot more dimension than I've ever seen his art have at Marvel. The thing is, the digital issues are very expensive on Distillery. So even though, and this was one of those books that straddled the year. If this had just come out in 2024 or all in 2025, it would be in my top 10. But it was like 2 issues in one year and 1 issue in the other year. And they're all super oversized issues with over 50 pages of story. But this was absolutely delightful. I loved every page. I think it's brilliant. It's going to go down as one of my favorite time travel comic books. I would maybe suggest checking it out when the physical comes out from Distillery, because it's really expensive. And I don't know if I can endorse how expensive it is, but it was very, very good. And you are getting 52-page issues. I think in US dollars, it would have been about $10 an issue digitally, which is a lot of money. And I really would prefer if the issues were maybe 64 pages for $10, which is what Hickman God's #1 was. But it was incredibly, incredibly good. All right, so I'm just gonna briefly catch up on the comics because now it is time to go into our actual comics of this week. People saying me that the format is fine, anytime is fine, that I'm worrying about nothing, love the randomness, it's wherever the flow takes us. Well, I'm very influenced by my friend and mentor OmniDog, and OmniDog's streams have a flow, and I think that's part of what makes them so lovable and him so lovable. So I'm trying not to project manage the ever living crap out of this, even though that is my nature and one of the hats that I wear professionally. So like part of me wants to be a project manager or a stage manager that's like at 32 minutes we start doing the blah, but I think the looseness hopefully is part of the appeal. Everybody's saying that there's a good amount of interaction and hosts, and it's kind of like a warm-up act before the main event. Yeah, Logan, that's what I actually think of it as, that I don't want to just jump right into doing the top comics, because you kind of need the context of me and we need time to like hang out. A late night show, there's a reason they don't just start interviewing the guests right away, and it's because it needs to give you time to like get comfortable and feel like you know who the host is. Okay. Everybody's down with it. Okay, lots of good feedback. Piet Dijkstra saying hello, Krisis and the Monitors. Oh, is that the Monitors? I don't know who that is. Is that what we're calling the fans? I don't know. Max says, I love it. We're all here for interaction. Getting highlighted is almost like reaching out and feeling the touch of the Lord. Reach out and touch. Okay. Amazing Fantasy 15 would be a 6-issue opening arc today. Completely agreed. John Parle is saying the amount of story you're getting in early Spider-Man is pretty amazing. Yeah, Silver Age, it's funny how modern readers tend to bounce off of Silver and Bronze Age comics, not because of the quality, but because they are so overwhelmed by how long they take to read that it's like they're totally rocked by it, which I often feel even myself, especially when I go back and read Golden Age comics, because Golden Age comics be dense, y'all. Dense. When I say that the average 6-issue minutes of comics to a speed reader, that's a normal pace for me. I have to remember to slow down and linger on art because I'm a very, very fast reader. Like I read novels lightning fast. Everybody in my family does. We're just big readers. And if the art is not really picking the right moments to show me and giving me the things to imagine and dissect, I will start reading a comic book like it's a novel and just like read from balloon to balloon. So a lot of times this show of a comic that takes me 10 minutes plus to read is that it's a comic that has art that really made me linger. But it's funny, certain series always take me the same amount of time to read, sometimes within seconds. There are series that only take me like 4 minutes and 20 seconds to read. And if you look at my history, it's like 420, 421, 418, 413. So there's definitely something to certain writers, certain artists that just always are quicker for me to digest. And you have to think that I read a huge volume of comics, which is not to say that's why I speed through them. I don't feel like I speed through them, but I'm very used to digesting the visual language of them. So a lot of times I don't need to dissect the art to understand it, but I want to dissect it because I love comic books. If I got a week and there were 60 books in my polls and every one of them had art good enough to dissect, then that week I would just take a hell of a lot more time to read the comic books. Talking to each other. Ryan Wilson saying, I want to read Batman and Robin, but I prefer to just wait until the trade comes out. Yeah, I would wait for trade on that one. The individual issues are okay, but I find almost all Chris Samney stuff reads better in trade just because not that it's not satisfying as singles, but it's just so fun to get a whole book. And I feel like he really understands how to pace well as an artist. And he's an artist I linger on throughout the story and connect the issues to each other. So it doesn't just feel purely episodic. It feels like you're reading for where we left off in the last issue, even if it doesn't pick up at the next scene. So I find Chris Samney very, very enjoyable to read in trade. Cruel Angel, yeah, Robin is a lot of fun in the series. Agreed. Elemis, I won't be rushing to read my Wonder Woman Golden Age Omni then. Well, I love Golden Age Wonder Woman. I have it right here. It'll be in my next shipment is the new Golden Age Wonder Woman Omni, which was delayed for so long that I'm happy that it exists. But yeah, Golden Age stories take a long, long time to read. Lance McNair saying, I actually preferred 60s Spider-Man to 90s through 2000 Spider-Man as a kid right from the jump. I've warmed up to Ultimate, but back then I was thinking it was the Imposter series compared to the classic. That's how I always feel about Ultimate. But I know what you mean. Like to me, I think I get used to comics that read fast because that's just where we are now. But also it's like weird to me that everybody expects a comic to read fast and sometimes criticize a comic for reading slowly. But I'll talk about that more later. Okay, I'm going to go back because now we have the actual comics that I read this week. Actually, I did not read 2000 AD. So I have been having 2000 AD as my treat when I'm done my poll. And I actually don't like it that much. I just think the random nature of not knowing what anthology stories will be in it, who the creators will be, or what the genre will be is just not my bag. So I think the era of 2000 AD reading is over. It lasted a whole 5 weeks. It was very enjoyable. So instead, I think when I get to the end of my poll with enough time to spare before the show, which I actually did today, I think that I should get to read some catch-up read that I've been meaning to read and start working through it. So I was thinking maybe later in the show I could put a poll up. Maybe the next time I take a break for chat, I'll figure, because I've never done a poll before. I don't know how to do it. I don't think I can do it from StreamYard. I've got to go to the actual the actual YouTube. Maybe I will put a poll up for what one of my like older reads I should do, and you can all vote on it, and that's what I can have as my reward in the future. Okay, which finally brings us, we're 48 minutes into my first book of the actual week, Absolute Wonder Woman, which of course is by Kelly Thompson with art by Hayden Sherman, colors from Jordi Belair, and letters from Becca Carey, who's amazing. She's on Blue Sky, go follow her. Finally, we got to the end of this first arc. I was not satisfied by it at all. This had yet another slice of individual piece of Wonder Woman's story, which was the origin of her lasso and how it can be used. It introduces a new aspect of her powers, which is that using the lasso, she can transform other things or even herself. She becomes a giant kaiju, which is cool. But I just spent 5 issues, slowly, languorously, annoyingly paced issues, to just find out that Diana is magic. I feel like this could have all been done in 2 issues. And I think that it's really, really hurt my enjoyment of the series. It's written well. The art is amazing, but I'm on the verge of drop. I know that we have issues coming from Matea Dialis coming up, a frequent collaborator with Kelly Thompson and one of my favorite artists in comics. I will stick around for those, but this, I don't know if I can hang in if we're just going to do long, slow, boring arcs like this arc. And I know a lot of people have liked it. I'm happy you liked it. If you liked it, maybe you're just more oriented to reading 5-issue long arcs issue by issue. For me, felt like torture. Okay. The Amazing Spider-Man. I often, after I've read the comic and I've rated it, I will go on the League of Extraordinary Geeks, whatever it's called, League of Comic Book Geeks, to see how other people have rated it, just to get a sense of how something is landing. Very rarely is anything in the negative, because comic fans just love to rate everything a 4, and they're like, I hated it, 4. This is actually rated overall in the negative, which made me laugh because it's a really good issue. It's by Christos Gage, who's one of the most reliable spider writers of the last 15 years, with art by Mark Buckingham. Yes, that Mark Buckingham from Fables, who inked Generation X #1 on Chris Bogolo pencils. It looks great. The colors from Matteo Iancono, great. Letters from Joe Caramagna, great. But Spider-Man wasn't in this issue. It was an X-Men issue. And it's one of these .deaths issues, which maybe at this point have telegraphed they're not primarily a Spider-Man issue, but why not call it .x or .jugs? Because it's all about Juggernaut. Like, it just felt like such a bait and switch, and it felt so weird. Like, X-Men sells comics. Call it an issue of X-Men. Call it Deaths of Spider-Man, the X-Men one-shot. It just, poor marketing. Fine story. Really kind of a fun story of, like, Juggernaut in a fight against Sidorak. And, like, can the other children of Sidorak stop Juggernaut, who himself derives his powers from Sidorak? I really liked it. But I like the X-Men. And I think I don't read solicitor marketing copy, so I don't have an opinion in either direction. But I think it was fine, but it's totally inessential to understand this Ace Deaths of Spider-Man story. It's really just if you happen to want to see a one-shot of this Jed MacKay X-Men team and you really like them, then read it. Otherwise, there's nothing really going on. Now we come to Marvel's web exclusives, the first of which is Astonishing Avengers. And this has writing from Steve Orlando, art from Francesco Archidiacono, colors from Carlos Lopez, and letters from Travis Lanham. This was pretty good. I'm really into this arc. I will say that the colorist, Carlos Lopez, he's doing this very web comic coloring thing. It's hard for me to explain, but it's the level of saturation, and it doesn't have that Marvel house style shine, but it's the way, I can't quite articulate it. It's the way he's doing the skin tones and the way that he's highlighting the skin tones only with shadow instead of highlight, which actually is my preference, but it's so stick outy in Marvel, but it makes sense because this is them trying to compete and draw in like a webtoons crowd. So I think it makes sense that this looks very much like a webtoons comic book, which I do think tend to have a very specific kind of coloring look that's different from the house color style and Marvel and DC. I don't understand why Elektra is on this team. She adds nothing. Like, you have Shang-Chi right there. I don't understand why Orlando like is pushing to have Elektra be an Avenger. Also, a lot of people this week are referencing Elektra's psychic powers. Really? Psychic power? Like, I know she has like mental connection powers, but let's not go and make Elektra a telepath. That's not necessary. We don't need to do all that. Okay. Now comes Astonishing Spider-Man. Do I even need the timer? I get so frustrated with this series. Look, Scott Ackerman, Julian Shaw, Cecil De La Cruz, Joe Sabino. I'll say the thing I say every week, which is that this should just be doing fun spider action. If you're trying to do some kind of romance plot, we all know it doesn't count because it's in a web series, so what is the point? I will say that after them briefly kissing in costume, it's basically this webhead just mocking Spider-Man the whole time, which I did really enjoy, but it just feels like, why are you pretending this comic is ever going to be acknowledged by anybody? And I'm a continuity nut, so it makes it impossible for me to appreciate. Also, I hate I've decided after several weeks of complaining about this, hate how CC de la Cruz colors the spider costume. They are not individual metallic panels that have their own metallic shine on each one. That is the wrong way to color Spider-Man. Okay, now we come to Astonishing X-Men, and this was the final issue in this Juggernaut Tim Seeley arc, which I loved, with art from Eduardo Arduino, colors from KJ Diaz, and letters from Clayton Kels. This was fantastic. This whole arc was a brilliant character study of Juggernaut, and by extension, a brilliant character study of Black Tom. And the art was great. It was really enjoyable. This was good enough that I think it deserves to be released as a single issue, and I hope they release it as a single issue. And please, can we get Tim Seeley on an ongoing Marvel comic book that's not just the Rogue Retcon comic book? I really like that X-Men has this digital online thing, because here's the difference between X-Men and Spider-Man. X-Men has so much characters, so much plot, that X-Men needs a digital comic just to do more of that. Spider-Man's the opposite. He's one character. He's already in tons of books. We know that a digital comic book for Spider-Man is going to be disposable. But for X-Men, we know a digital comic book might be the only chance that we get to see certain characters or certain interactions. So it's exciting. And I think it's the same is true for the Avengers. I'm not saying that shouldn't be a reason to have a Spider-Man digital comic book. I'm saying a Spider-Man digital comic book should rely much more on the vertical scroll format to give us fun, artistic stuff of Spider-Man just swinging around and doing action in a way that you can't show in a normal comic book. Whereas I think we absolutely do read an X-Men digital comic book for the plot. I don't know if anybody's reading this for the plot. It's called AXA. It's actually, the actual title of it is AXA Classics, because this is I think, Bronze Age comic that is a straight reprint, and I kind of was intrigued by it, but I don't really include reprint comics in my purview of things that I read every week, but I would like to check it out because it's clearly an interesting slice of comic book history, and I want to learn a little bit more about it, but did not read it. This, I don't even know what this is called because they didn't put the logo on the damn cover. It's the Badger. The Badger Rock and Roll at Sea Pirates something. It's a Mike Baron comic, and it's not available digitally, and I really want to read it, and I guess that's never going to happen. Okay, then we have Batman the Long Halloween, which I did catch up on for this week because Max told me he was reading it. So this is really interesting. It's a series that is a sequel to The Long Halloween and the sequel to Long Halloween, which name I always forget. Originally, Tim Sale was going to do this with Jeff Loeb. Then Tim Sale tragically passed away. So Jeff Loeb is doing the stories with a different artist on every issue, somewhat in the Tim Sale style, but they don't feel chained to it, with colors by Dave Stewart and letters by Richard Starkings. This is the Bill Sienkiewicz issue, so I have a lot of interior to show you. Bill Sienkiewicz doing Joker, like, wow. I will say, Sienkiewicz's art is so wild that it definitely gave this a different feel. I think up to this point, the 4 issues so far have felt just like Long Halloween in the best possible way. I was skeptical that Loeb would be able to recapture that magic almost 30 years later. The magic is recaptured. This issue felt different, a little bit more like a fever dream, just because it's so different to follow Sienkiewicz's art. The other thing is, I like Sienkiewicz's art with texture. To me, his art has texture in it. I pulled this page specifically to show that. You can see all the texture, not just in the backgrounds, but on Batman's mask, on his face, and the Joker's clothing. And I think when Sienkiewicz tries to draw without as much texture, or a colorist kind of like makes that a little bit glided over with their colors, I lose what I love about Sienkiewicz. So I didn't like this page as much, even though Joker is very textured there on the horse. There were a few pages like that I don't know if that was Sienkiewicz doing cleaner line work or if it's Stewart coloring over some of the sketchier lines, but I lost the pleasure that I take in Bill Sienkiewicz's art. But if you love Long Halloween, you absolutely should be picking this up or planning to pick it up in trade. I think I'm going to read, is it Dark Victory? Is that the middle chapter from 1999? I think I'm going to read that because I love Long Halloween so much and I've never read it. Okay. This is another Marvel digital comic, Beastly Buddies. Look at them, so cute. This is by Steve Fox, by art by Armand Bodnar, colors from KJ Diaz, and letters from Joe Sabino. Again, it's not quite in continuity because it has this little cute chibi version of Werewolf by Night, but it's using characters in present continuity because it has present continuity Doctor Strange, the Snakes, and Bats, which are all from 2015 and forward. So it's set in kind of current continuity, even though these little cute characters are not from current continuity. This was really charming. If you haven't read this series yet, this actually was probably my most charming issue of it. It's very little happens. They go to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum and they think about staying there, but all the rooms are drawn in a style of a different Doctor Strange past artist or in a different Doctor Strange villain. And they're like, oh, this is too crazy. Maybe we can find somewhere else in the neighborhood to stay. But for a cute, kid-oriented 10-page digital comic, I think it was absolutely delightful, really, really slice of cuteness. I don't read Black Canary Best of the Best. It is by Tom King, and that's really all I have to say about that. I don't read Black Hammer Spiral City because it's by Jeff Lemire, who is not as problematic as Tom King, but I just don't like his writing. I do have a really good Black Hammer guide, though, which I had to read a lot of Black Hammer for, but I'm not going to keep reading. Then we have Blade, which I can't read because it's red band, which means it's physical only. So I can't read it until it comes out in trade. And then we have Calavera P.I, which I read the first issue of on Global Comics. And I think I really liked it, but there were no other issues on Global Comics. And I just was not going to, I didn't like it enough to spend $12 on it. So I was like, well, we're just going to stick with what's on Global Comics. But it's interesting. It's about this detective that is, like in the kind of, I guess they're in like the silent film noir detective era, and he dies. And at the end, in the first issue, and then he gets brought back as the skeleton detective at the end of the first issue, which I really love, and I really dug the art from it too. And I think I didn't take any excerpts from issue 1, but because he didn't come back as a skeleton until the end of the first issue, I was like, I don't really know what to expect from this book, so I'm not gonna like take $12 worth. It's one of those things where sometimes a number 1 issue is kind of more like a 0 issue because it's just kind of setting up the plot, but it doesn't get you to the actual concept of the plot, which is delightful. But then if we're talking about, am I going to spend $4 on your second issue? You haven't sold me. So in this case, I'm going to wait for it to hit digital all you can eat. This is Captain America and Volstagg, which is one of the one-shots by John Michael Straczynski with a rotating group of artists. Here, Bernard Chang, colored by Marcelo Mayo, and letters by Joe Caramagna. And since I hated JMS's Cap so much, and since I generally have been hating Bernard Chang's art lately, I did not go into this with high hopes. So imagine my surprise when I tell you that I love this. It was a really interesting Volstagg character study. There were points in it that I kept thinking, this doesn't sound like Volstagg. This is not something Volstagg would do. And the story addressed that. It was really a moment to just take this character, take him away from the Warriors 3 and explore what motivates him when he's by himself. What are his morals and ethics? What are the things that make him excited? Every character is every person is a character in their own story, a main character in their own story. I'm my own main character. You're your own main character. In comic books, there's some characters that only ever get to be a side character. And Volstagg is one of those characters. Very rarely do we get to see something that lets us into his inner life. But by pairing him with Cap here, JMS finds a way to show us Volstagg's inner life. And it was very, very delightful. I think the art was good. The colors were good. It was a great one and done story that honestly is going to stick with me. So nice job. Maybe there's a reason these one shots exist. I was a little hard in the first one with Rocket Raccoon and Doom, but this one really kind of felt like it earned its right to exist. This was the final issue of Carlyle School for Kings, which was a mini series. It does have a little bit of an open-ended ending. I don't know if it's going to get to come back. It's script by Nelson Greaves, art and cover by David Castelluccio, colors from Francesca Vivaldi, and letters from Frank Sedovic. The thing about this is it gave you exactly the story it promised it would give you. And there are merits to that. So this set up this girl, the king killed her parents for being, traitors. They weren't really. This kingdom doesn't have a lineage of kings. You go to this king school, and whoever graduates at the top of the king class becomes the next person who would replace the current king. I'm a little unclear what happens did they do that every few years, or if the king dies young, when will they do it? I didn't really understand that. But anyway, so of course she wants to kill the king. And of course her goal of being at the school is not to be the next king. And this issue gives you everything that you would want to complete that story. And also it's pretty bloody, like bloodier than some of the interiors from the Red Band books that I've seen online. So, but it was satisfying, but it kind of didn't, there's no twist of the knife. I mean, there was a literal twist of the knife, but it kind of just ends, which is fine. I'm not saying every series needs to be some kind of crazy rug pull, but I just felt like I got to the end and I was like, that was it. Like, because it told exactly the story it promised it would tell, I never had this moment of epiphany of like better understanding of a character or growth or anything. It kind of just felt very static. Like, here is a character, we know who she is, and here she is doing the thing we knew what she would do. So I think it was okay, and I think this was a pretty strong creative team. I would absolutely read something else from them. I just don't think that this had enough of a rising and falling arc across of it, especially because since everything was so in service to getting us on time to this point in issue number 4, it didn't feel like we got to have enough fun with them all being at this king school, what the downtime is like, what the intellectual challenges of it are like, because it was just a speeding bullet towards this ending. So I can't say that I recommend it, but it was fine. And I would definitely read something else by this team. All right, here's whatever this is broken. I'm sorry. I don't know. Let me see if I can go. And this is what made me think the whole PDF was broken. Let me see what came after Oh, it's just a cover. I know, because it's a cover that's so big that I downloaded in really, really high res. It's the 9 Lives of Salem. Chilling Adventures presents The 9 Lives of Salem from Archie Comics. And it's actually by Cullen Bunn. It's all about Sabrina's cat. But I thought it was reprints of other stories, because Archie so often does digests of old stories that I didn't realize until it was too late. And then I downloaded this giant cover, which confused me for 5 minutes. And there we go. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Corvus. And I think after I get through the C's, we'll move on to something else. So this Corvus, this book, I've been really meaning to read. I said last time that it looked really cool. So I discovered that it's on Global Comics, but at a lag. So issue 6, this is the issue out this week. Global Comics only had issues 1 through 4. And so I read issues 1 through 4. It's by Buddy Baudouin, writer and letterer, Christopher Sassman, artist, and Allison Hugh, colors. If you have Global Comics, I really want you to go check this out. I pulled some art from various issues. I think this artist, Christopher Sassman, has got something really special. Some of the way that he draws figures and shades really reminds me of Clay Mann, but he really is good at like kinetic moments of action. And also there was kind of an astral plane issue that I think he did a really good job in a way that I was very surprised to see in an indie comic, like a artist this confidently and this strongly dealing with kind of the fractured mental landscape of the mental plane. So I thought the art was outstanding. And I thought the story was really interesting. It was kind of framed similarly to, I guess I should start the clock. I guess it was framed really similarly to the original first few minutes of The Matrix, where like he's just this hacker, but people who are doing something more important than just hacking are noticing his skills, which would be applicable to their thing through his hacking. In this, it's about kind of the defense of Earth against these crazy space monsters. They're all like giant eldritch monsters floating through space. And so they farm people from Earth who are really good at video games to come and help them do it. And they tap this one guy who just works at a video store, but he would be the next great defender of the galaxy. So this is a 6-issue arc and a 6-issue series, but I did feel like each issue had a very specific setup. Like the first issue was like the kind of the discovery, the beginning of the hero's journey. The second issue was like a space guns blazing kind of war issue. The third issue was an astral plane issue. The fourth issue was like a politics / caper issue. And I really appreciated that, because even though we're all in one arc, it felt like each issue was satisfying in a way. And then the story and the style of the storytelling changed with the next issue, which made me really feel like I was getting something new. I almost put this in my top 10, and the only reason I didn't is because I can't read issue 5 and 6 yet because they're not on Global Comics, but I highly recommend this. I will say, I was talking to James about this because James read it too. I'll pop up his comments in just a second. I felt like it was a little fast and loose with the video game thing. Like supposedly these other 2 women that he meets that are the women that are the crew of the ship were the number 1 and number 2 ranked people in the video game. Spoilers. So clearly they were adopted from Earth at different times, but then the story kind of is confusing about like when they were taken from Earth. And so maybe it hasn't always been a video game. Maybe people used to be good at different things. I don't know. It was briefly confusing to me, but it also made me like even more interested in the world building of it. So it didn't really take me out of it. It just was that brief moment of discontinuity where I sometimes get hung up a little bit. Honestly, it kept pulling me along so well that I didn't stay hung up. So this is by Dead Sky, a comic publisher I've never heard of before. I would keep reading another 20 issues of this. I would absolutely read more stories from this team. And I absolutely would recommend you check it out on Global Comics. And I did even more interiors. So this was from the 4th issue. That's why I did so many interiors. I did 1 per issue because I was trying to show the different. So this is from the space battle. This is from the astral plane. This is more from the astral plane. I just really loved it. Get this guy in an X-Men book. And then this was from the kind of like caper funny fight issue. And I just like, you know, the faces are goofy. It's funny. It's so that this was kind of a slapstick comedy scene, but also that little inset panel. This is going to be one of our big topics today as we get further in the alphabet. Notice that great use of that diagonal inset panel. It's showing her hand in real space. It's exactly what we would be seeing in the main panel, but it's boxing it out and it's graying out everything else in the background so we can see her plucking the ID card out of this guy's pocket. But then because it's diagonal and moving to the left, it draws our eyes back down to the beginning of the next big panel at the bottom so that we sweep back across that. Leading the eye is something really important in comic books that you might take for granted, but especially when we're in pages that have these full width panels, sometimes they don't have really good leading of the eye. The eye should be always traveling across the page like this, left, at least in American comics, left to right and then back to the left, right? And so this was, I thought, such a clever use of an inset panel to not only highlight action, but to draw our eyes back to the left. We're going to see some artists who are not as good as that, who are working for Marvel a little bit later in the show. Okay. Oh, and this is Critter, which I don't read because it's from Antarctic Press. I did look on Global Comics, and issue number 1 was on Global Comics, but I do not understand our Antarctic Press's digital strategy. I don't know if things ever come out in digital, or when they do, or when I can read them or buy them. So I put them on because they could have been on the pull list, but I never know. And then this was an indie comic by Bad Bug called Curse of the Gorgon. The last issue came out months ago, so I think maybe it's like a Kickstarter thing, or maybe they're just slow to publish. Yeah, it looks a little cheesecakey, and it's the mature 17 plus, so it's probably going to be about breasts primarily, but I would have given it a chance, but I did not see it in Global Comics. I don't think it was the last thing I looked for before I got on the show. And now we're on to D. So you know what? I'm going to pause to take a look at the comments. If I can make my way back up to the last starred comment. Okay, let's see what you've been saying. Logan Wayne wishes he could read fast. I read so slowly and I hate it. Well, you know what? I think that there are strategies to reading fast when it comes to textbooks and prose books that don't always help you in comics, but it's partially about knowing where to send your eyes. And I'm not saying that everybody should aspire to read fast, but I think there are techniques and practices you could use if you want to speed up your reading a little bit. But at the same time, if you're reading at a speed that helps your comprehension and you like your level of comprehension, then you are reading at the right speed. Hayden saying Golden Age Wonder Woman is a telepathic bondage queen. Yes, and I love her for it. James Abel, poll can only be done on YouTube, not StreamYard. Thank you, James, the producer, Abel. James Abel for Wonder Woman number 5. Great ending to the first absolute Wonder Woman story arc. What an interesting take on the lasso of truth and Medusa. Well, James apparently had more patience for it than I did. Lance McNair saying I have a strong affinity for Golden Age Superman, which I'm going to get to read for the first time when the Superman, in this Superman Golden Age DC Finest. I've never read Golden Age Superman before, maybe just the first issue. So I'm really excited to read this. Maybe if I finish my pulls early, I get to read DC Finest. But I was thinking maybe that should be their own video. I don't know. There's very little time for anything in this house at this point in time, so I got to squeeze in things where I can. But Lance goes on to say, had to take a break from the DC Finest volume because it reads best in small doses. Yeah, you can't binge Golden Age comics. Piet Dijkstra, any recommendations for anthology series? I just reread Silver Coin and want to catch up on Ice Cream Man. There's those 2 EC Comics anthology series from Oni Press. I've been reading the fantasy one, Cruel Kingdom, but there's also a horror one from last week that I haven't been reading, so maybe you would dig that if you've been digging horror anthology. It has been well established that the anthology is not my favorite mode of comic book consumption, so I don't have a lot of anthology recommendations, but maybe some other people in the comments can recommend any current anthologies to Pete that they have been enjoying. Lance, pacing in Absolute Wonder Woman is molasses. I would agree with that. Looks like some people did give, and I'm going to highlight one of the comments drink that I don't usually do because Cruel Angel remembered the name of the other series, which is Epitaphs from the Abyss. Also, Hello Darkness is a horror anthology, but we'll get there. It's kind of anthology, kind of not. And there's a reason that I was going to read it this week, but then didn't. But we'll talk about it when we get there. The Amazing Juggernaut was a super fun issue. That's what Max calls Astonishing X-Men. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's so good. Could it be the best X-Men issue in the line right now? There wouldn't be much debate over that other than from Storm. Okay, Christos Gage gets a lot of praise, but I find it odd how he never gets any main series from the big 2. He's been around for a while and only seems to get minis and backups. He had some main series back in the day of like 2008, 2009, 2010, and I think what Marvel discovered is that he just was not a name seller, and Marvel had a lot of people that they were using very frequently in that period, some of whom even got to launch series in Marvel Now, but when they didn't turn out to be big sellers, Marvel really cleaned house of them editorially, or maybe they didn't like how Marvel was treating them and left. But the writer's bench got really, really slimmed down by the time we got to All New, All Different Marvel, and it felt like we lost a lot of those people that were really reliable. But Gage never totally went away because he's friends with Dan Slott, and Dan Slott taps him all the time as a fill-in when Dan Slott is behind or doesn't want to write a certain issue, I guess. But Christos Gage also, I think a lot of these comic authors, they become invisible to us because we don't see them writing comics, but they're off doing like video game writing or in a writer's room for a TV show. You know, they're still writers. They're their own main character, having their own career. So Gage has done a ton of stuff. I could be lying, but I think he wrote the PlayStation Spider-Man tie-in comics, but he's just a really good spider writer, and I wish he would do something indie just so we could see his own created universe, but I just don't think he's a big name seller, so it's hard because he can't just sell on the name of Chris Gage. Marvel does sometimes have him write something. Didn't he recently write like Superior Spider-Man or something like that? But anyway, I'm a big fan of him. I've always really liked him. I think he's a great writer. Oh, that's an at somebody else. Tim Burnham, Elektra. Oh, see, Tim would know the answer to this because it's Daredevil related. Elektra as a telepath is not only a terrible, unnecessary idea. Let me give him the full Krisis rant voice. It's not only a terrible, unnecessary idea, but I have no idea it was even a thing. Is this just a development of these web exclusive titles? I don't know, but 2 different comics mentioned it this week. 2 different comics. The Avengers comic and something else I read was like, well, Elektra as a telepath. I was like, what the actual F are you talking about? Okay. Max Appleman, I'm loving all the attention Juggernaut is getting. Logan Wade, wait, Elektra's a telepath? Since when? Well, Tim Burnham just said since never, and he would be the one I would trust to know. Ryan Wilson saying, always loved seeing Black Tom and Juggernaut in the past. Well, they're boyfriends. They felt like anti-heroes you kind of wanted to root for in the 80s. Sorry, there's a trash truck going by if you can hear that, and it's loud. Sinkovich. I said that, didn't I? What did I say? Sinkovich? Oh, I'm going to say Sankovich, but it's Sinkovich. Alma's very low-level telepath, I think, from her training with the hand. Right, the whole thing is, I don't want her to seem like she's Jean Grey. I don't want her to, like, connect people's minds. I just want her to have, like, intuition. I want her to have good intuition about people. That's as much as I feel like I want to play that beat. Max Appleman, who turned me on to Batman The Long Halloween, the last Halloween, really enjoying the series. This issue was a psychedelic nightmare in a good way, really trippy art, felt that it really worked. Ryan Wilson only read the first issue of this, but plan on reading everything once all of the issues come out. Yeah, it's really, really great. And I think it's a great tribute to Tim Sale. Cruel Angel saying, already looking forward to Absolute for last Halloween. The art has been so good. James with my fill-in review on Black Carry, best of the best. Do we really need more flashback? Move plot faster. It seems like you're stretching this out way too long again. Well, that's one of the reasons I don't like Tom King. It's not just his bad writing, it's also his bad writing. Beyond Comics saying Dark Victory is terrific, and in my opinion is a superior mystery to Long Halloween. Well then, Beyond, on your recommendation, I am going to make time to read it. Probably not this week, because I'm already out of time this week. Probably next week. Crazy thing to say on a Monday here in New Zealand, but I already know what my week looks like, and I barely have time to do any exercise, which I definitely need to do. I have not been swimming for a couple weeks. I got to go back. Lance J. McNair saying, I've been enjoying Black Canary book, but the way King writes, the fight announcers, because it's a wrestling book, it's grating after a while. I admit the art is doing the heavy lifting. Ryan Wilson has loved Volstagg, so I was thinking of checking that out, but didn't know if JMS Cap Run was required. No, it has nothing to do with JMS Cap Run, only like a tiny wink at it. And if you love Volstagg, it's one of the best Volstagg issues of all time. I'll be very interested to hear if you think it's true to Volstagg. There's one point that I was like, do I believe this? But I think the comic made a good enough case for me that I did. James, yeah, I cannot wait to read Corvus 5 and 6. I really, really think that it was really good. Whoa, Kane says Corvus reminds of Ernest Cline's Armada. Don't read it, it's horrible. Okay, well then I won't read it. Ruxmo saying, I've been exploring global comics after last week's stream. Great suggestion. Yeah, I think I'm going to upgrade my monthly membership to a yearly membership, because honestly, I'm using it constantly, and it's how I'm catching up on a lot of these indie books. So I think it's going to stick around. Might as well save some money and sign up for the year. James Abel, Corvus 1 through 3, the series giving The Matrix meets Galaxy Quest, which is the perfect description of it. Larry's Library, I read comics a lot slower than I do prose. I linger on the art and tend to be hypercritical about it. Yeah, me too. When the art warrants it, which is not a thing about art quality, but if like there's nothing about the art that makes my eye stick and drag on it, which is not to say that art needs texture. My eye sticks to Marcus Toe art, which is very, very plain-faced and clean. But there's got to be a reason to kind of grab me and make me look at not only the line art, but like the coloring and the paneling. And I think we've all established I'm a big coloring person. Max Appleman saying, if you've read the DC Finest Golden Age Superman, you'll come across the lyrics I wrote music for. Max wrote the music to this song that like it's a Superman or must be a Superman. And it's such a fun melody to sing that he actually sent me the sheet music. I forget if Max had it on his channel or if he's played it on somebody else's channel, but Max does a new Beetle Bop out today. Go check it out. It's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds on multiple guitars and bass. I've never seen Max play bass before, but the Beetle Bops have been so lovely. And I love that he's stretching them out to be like more full songs instead of just kind of like brief ideas or passages. So please keep checking them out. He is linked in that Friends of Crushing Krisis strip on the channel. Lance McNair saying, my speed of reading varies wildly depending on multiple factors. I used to knock out big Harry Potter books in 2 days as a kid, but that's harder for me to do now. And Larry's Library, part of our ongoing revolt of stop giving Elektra psychic powers. Okay, we're going to get on with the comics. I'm blind, so I'm going to put my glasses back on. And here we go. So this is Day of the Dead Girl, a Magma comic series I've been really appreciating. It's been showing up day and date on Global Comics, but it wasn't there this week. So I don't know if it was delayed or maybe the print issue came out and the digital didn't, but I did get to read it, but I've been really enjoying it. So I will do it as one of my catch-up reads whenever it does pop up. So there's this issue Death Goddess of Cthulhu, which when I first saw it looked like a little bit of a breast comic, but it's written by Pat Shand, who I've enjoyed as an indie art creator before. And there's another Pat Shand comic from this same company later in the stream that actually looked really cool to me. So I might try that one. They're all labeled mature readers, and so we'll see if they're breast comics or if they actually have stories. But I think Pat Shand, I've read him do stuff that's a breast comic and a good story. So we will check that out in the future. Okay, next up, Department of Truth. I spent possibly an inadvisable amount of time catching up on this on Saturday that I should have been reading other comics. So it's by Jim Tynion, of course, with art from Martin Simmons, who I love. I think he's the modern day Bill Sienkiewicz. If you like Bill Sienkiewicz, Simmons does that style extraordinarily well. Letters from Etia Bidikar, one of my favorite letterers, one of the people I'd most like to interview, actually, and designs by Dylan Todd. The thing about Department of Truth is it has such a core of interesting story. I think it's the best pitch of a comic book right now. Honestly, I'm addicted. It's about this idea of like truth is relative, and the people who control media and control what people believe to control the truth. So of course the United States would have a Department of Truth. Of course, the banner's still up. Of course, Russia would have a well, you didn't see that timer. You didn't see that. Let's just start it again. Of course, the US would have a Department of Truth. Of course, Russia would have a Ministry of Lies. Such an interesting thing. And it's Tynion playing with a whole history of the United States and saying, even if something has been proven to be true now, how do we know it was true when it happened? Maybe it became true and now we think it's true. So he's played with the Kennedy assassination, which is one of the core plot elements of this, but he's also played with Marilyn Monroe, the moon landing. This talks about Watergate. And like, how much was that stuff fabricated and how much was it real, and would we ever know? So it's the best comic ever for somebody who's like an X-Files fan who loves conspiracy theories. The problem is Tynion is doing this thing that he does where sometimes it feels like there's so little ideas to stretch out. And this is like coming back after a break. Some big things are happening. We're really looking into Watergate, but also like what would happen, kind of the idea of like Watergate as a fake fabricated thing that became true versus the idea of could something happen today that was a big enough journalism story as Watergate? Does the current environment, not only of journalism, but also of credibility and reality, lend itself to being able to break a story that big and for people to actually care without it just being dismissed as a conspiracy theory, which is such an interesting thing to be talking about in this moment of time. But this issue felt so slight. It just felt like nothing was happening. And this is such a weird series for me. If you look at my ratings, I have like issues rated 1.5 and 2 because I just feel like nothing happens. And then issues rated 4 and 4.5 because I think they're the best thing ever. I do love it very, very much, and I'm so happy I binged it. I think it reads great as a binge, but I just wish Tynion would find a way to get a little bit more content in there. Okay. Let's see what's next. Detective Comics by Tom Taylor. I love this. I was a little soft on last issue. I'm back this issue. I'm back. I think he's doing a much, much better Batman and Robin comic than Batman and Robin right now. This is written by Tom Taylor. It's art by Mikhail Janin, and he also does his own colors with Wes Abbott on letters. This was it was thrilling. I was like really, really worried about the characters multiple times. The colors, this delicious neon cast, something's been killing children. Something's been killing the children that have been prior incarcerated because they were juvenile delinquents, some of which have not even done terrible things. Batman is feeling so wrecked that they keep dying on his watch. So he's determined to not let this one die, but he's determined to get to the bottom of it. And how do you get to the bottom of it? You're going to have to send Damian to prison. Now, Damian has a little bit of an oppositional disorder. So the idea of Damian in prison, he's not going to behave himself. Is Batman betting on that? Or is he hoping that Damian can behave himself long enough to crack the case? It is intensely interesting, intensely gorgeous. I was on the edge of my seat. The Damian in prison stuff was so good, and it was absolutely delightful. I think it understood his character perfectly. Great job, Tom Taylor. I'm loving this Detective Comics run. Really, really into it right now. Dust to Dust, which slid out of my top 10 this week. Somebody else earlier was saying they didn't quite know what they felt about it. I think it was Tiger Eyes. This is by J.G. Jones and Phil Brand with art from J.G. Jones and letters from Jackie Marzan. This is an 8-issue series, I believe, 8 or 10. And this kind of got us to the main thrust of the plot, which there is something in this town. It's not just a Dust Bowl story. There's some kind of corruption, some kind of murder, some kind of hidden thing we're not seeing. And this is the first issue that really introduced that fully. It had some really heartbreaking passages in it that really made me linger. And talk about art that made me linger a long time. J.G. Jones, this is art that I will linger on. And again, just so many great uses of panels on this page, but each one of them like their own photograph, really drawing my eye to the action, watching from above, then at the level of his feet, then kind of zooming in on his hand. Just so interesting use of the camera. That all said, I think that this issue, in trying to introduce this lurking menace that's happening in the town, which I don't think is supernatural, I just think it's corruption. I think we just spent so much time away from our main two characters, who are the sheriff and the photographer, that at points I just couldn't tell why I was supposed to care. Like, there were two guys loading a truck. There's this young girl and her boyfriend who wants to get in her pants before they get married. I'm into the character vignettes, but because this introduced such an important story element, I really wanted to like focus on that and stay with it. And I felt like J.G. Jones and Philip Bram kept turning the camera away from the thing I was really trying to focus on, which started to get a little frustrating. So it was still a really good comic book, and I'm still intensely interested in what's going to happen, and I really like it. I just felt like this one, it had middle chapter syndrome, where it's like, we've got to establish all this other stuff. And I was like, no, stick with the stuff I've already got. Clearly it's going to be important to know about that other stuff, but I wanted to stick with the stuff that we already were reading. Exciting Comics, number 50, another Antarctic Press title. Exit City, which was a comic I really like. It's from Mad Cave. Issue number 4 was on the previews list for this week, but the digital copy was delayed, I think, till next week or the week after. So I don't know if physical issues shipped. Now we come to Fantastic Four. Once again, somehow, Ryan North has told one of the best Fantastic Four stories of all time. Maybe not of all time, but like top 100, I would say. Not some of them are best of all time. This is art by Corey Smith, inks from Oren Jr., colors from Jesus Abertov, letters from Joe Caramagna. This starts out in such a mild way, which is that Ben and Sue are just going to have a little bit of time off in New York. They know Doom is in charge, but you can't be the Resistance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even if you're the Fantastic Four. And this happens after One World under Doom number 1. So they're like, we need to just reset and get our energy back, which honestly is a great message in the real world right now. But in New York, there's still vampires, and the vampires they're not deadly anymore. They're living in the sunlight, and they still need blood to drink. But New Yorkers, of course, have turned against the vampires because they killed a bunch of people. And this is the first book to like take us down to the ground in that way and show us what is it like for everybody in the community to hate the vampires and basically to want the superheroes to kill the vampires. But the superheroes are like, well, I don't know, could we cure them? Like, are they still people? Are they evil? It has one of the most shocking, heartbreaking beats I've read in a Marvel comic in a long time. And it was just a fundamentally interesting one and done story about how the Fantastic Four decides to deal with that dichotomy of, do we want to protect the people from the vampires, or do we want to protect the vampires from the people? Clearly, Ryan North is going to be doing some really interesting things in this ongoing Fantastic Four title, while at the same time using Dr. Doom in his Dr. Doom event. There's a few people who excite me more in comics right now than Ryan North. John Burkett's Feral Star. I looked on Global Comics. I did not see it there. I looked on Amazon. I did not see it there. So I don't know how I could have read it. I didn't look that closely for Invader Comics First Wave. So here's an anthology. If you like sci-fi anthology, apparently it's going to be about like alien type stuff, but I did not read it. It is out this week. Now we come to The Flash by Cy Spurrier. This continues this kind of family fun arc from Cy Spurrier with art from Vasco Georgiev and colors from Matt Herms. I'm squinting because it's really small in the credits, and letters from Hassan Eule. I don't mean to mess up his name every week. I know I'm always supposed to go on YouTube and find out how to say it. Cy Spurrier, he just frustrates me sometimes. He has some moments of pure classic stories, like his first year of John Constantine Hellblazer. Then he has some pure crap stories, like his second year of John Constantine Hellblazer. This Flash book is dancing right on the line. He tries to do cute family fun, and I think Spurrier is good at heartfelt stuff, sometimes better than he is at big plot stuff. So this whole story keeps going back to the dog, and the way the dog is seeing the family, narrating the family, which is fine. But I just don't know if that's not enough to hang a Flash issue on. Luckily, the other half of the story is explaining how Eclipso became the villain here, and it's very tied into the DC All-In special, and that part I really liked, and it was not written in such a crazy poetic way by Spurrier that I couldn't follow it. Spurrier actually delivers this villain monologue in a really interesting way, and in a way that really is making me curious about how this ties into the broader stuff that's happening with Justice League. This book I don't think is ever going to be my favorite book for a few reasons, partially because I liked what it was doing in the heavier arc at 1 through 13, but also because I don't think Spurrier is the kind of author who's my favorite author. But if you like Spurrier, this is a very Spurrier book, and if you like Flash, I think this is a very interesting Flash book. I just think that I'm looking for a little something more that is not there. And now we come to FML. Folks, I love this comic book so much. It makes me emotional how much I love it. Honestly, it's by Kelly Sue DeComet, David Lopez, Chris Peter, and Clayton Cowles. If you haven't heard me talk about it already, it's basically about Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction's actual family, which if you followed them on Instagram, it's based on her kids, it's based on her life, but it's fictionalized. It's not purely autobiographical. And it's very much telling a parallel story about the son who just wants to be a cool teenager, but he's got anxiety, but he's in a death metal band, but also he's recently been turned into a monster, oops, by a satanic ritual that he was just experimenting. And then his mom, who has so much anxiety and also lost a friend who was murdered many years ago and is trying to deal with that while also being a successful author, while also being a successful mom. I don't think we've ever seen David Lopez go off to the level that he's going off in this book. I think superhero books vastly underutilized his talents. The way that he plays in the different ways, he's got these full colored pages, but then he's got the monster son who's just drawn on lined paper. And then he's got the Kelly Sue DeConnick mom character who's drawn like a hyper realistic manga character. It's so delightful. And he uses it to deliver punchline after punchline. Like, talk about an artist who can sell the comedy of the script. Look at how this goes from like an American comic style to going to like almost like a Junji Ito manga style at the bottom. And the idea that when you're a parent, your heart lives outside of your body because it's connected to your kid. But what happens when your kid gets old enough that the walking heart that is your kid walks out of the room and you realize you're not connected to them anymore? They are managing their own life and loves. How bereft would you feel? But this isn't all about parent sadness. It's absolutely funny. It's about anxiety. It's about old problems coming home to roost. It's about cops or pigs. It's about all sorts of things, and it's told with such a level of humor. Also, her husband, who is the Matt Fraction character, appears here and is just absolutely hilarious. Really fun. This comic has such heart. It's so punk rock. It's punk rock without being about music all throughout every issue, yet the punk rock vibe is there. And every issue has such cool back matter, including a zine that Kelly Sue DeConnick is writing it sequentially in each back issue, and then also like games and puzzles and stuff, but they in a way that even as an adult to me is engaging. Like, she talks about this idea of how much can you fit on your plate because your plate is overfull, which is something that resonates very strongly with me this week. And then the puzzle at the end of the comic is like, cut out your own plate that's overfull, which obviously I'm not going to print out and do, but it just made me laugh because it like really connected with me personally. It's my favorite comic book of 2025. I don't know if it's going to resonate for everybody. I love Kelly Sue DeConnick. I am a parent. I am a musician. So I think it's hitting me in a very specific sweet spot, but I do think there are things there for everybody who have gotten older, who have had anxiety, and who just want to fit in, but by trying to fit in, wind up sticking out even more. Next up, we have Freakier Than Normal, which I sampled actually a few weeks ago. And Antarctic Prince is printing it, but it was originally a Kickstarter digital comic that is on Global Comics. It's about a bunch of manga style characters in a realistic world who are playing video games, actually similar to Corvus. And one of them is so good at video games that she winds up repelling an alien invasion. It was just like a little too cutesy for me. Not my thing. I'm not reading Gatchaman by Cullen Bunn, although finally everyone explained to me what it is, so I know what it is now. G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. This is the Larry Hama G.I. Joe series, which has ongoing continuity stretching back to 1982. This was a one-off issue, which you would think would be a good jumping on point, but actually I think it was a pretty weak issue, probably the weakest issue of this whole series so far. So I would not recommend that you read it as a one-off issue. It has a new series artist, Andrew Crank, on it, as well as the typical colorist team, Francesco Segala, with flats by Sabrina Del Grosso and letters by Pat Brosso. Here's the thing. Larry Hama did a lot of issues like this when this title was at IDW under the same continuity, where he takes a couple of Joes and he has them do kind of a very small mission in a made-up country in the real world that's like counterterrorism. And they talk a lot about the kind of guns they have and where their drop zone is going to be. And then they shoot some people and then it's over. This is a fine story in that milieu, but I think the problem that I have with it is I don't necessarily want to see the G.I. Joes be real soldiers shooting terrorists and killing them. Way too many random people were killed in this issue for me, and that's not me being squeamish. That's just not what I'm here for with G.I. Joe. I know Real American Hero has become that, but I still want an element of the toyetic in there. I still want Cobra. I still want a little bit of kind of a fantastical angle to it. And then if a bunch of Vipers are shot, their lemmings. Like, that doesn't hit me the same as shooting a bunch of people with their masks off. So I don't know. This was just a little bit too much of like a bog standard military book, which honestly it was for a lot of its run at IDW. And I really felt like the book has aspired to more than that now that it's at Skybound, because it feels like that Hannah has the artists of a caliber that he can tell bigger stories than this. And also that editorial has been like, make G.I. Joe's G.I. Joe again. But this issue felt very reductive to me. It was fine. It wasn't a terrible comic, but it is not the thing that excites me about this series. This is from Keenspot. Again, I refuse to read Keenspot comics until any one of you has ever told me you've read a Keenspot comic. This is the Glopple. I don't know if this is the Keenspot comic I would have started with if I ever started that. This is Godzilla versus America, Godzilla versus Chicago from IDW. It's a one-shot. Look, y'all, I just don't love Godzilla or Kaiju. I'm already reading Godzilla Heist, which I liked last week, but a Godzilla one-shot is going to be totally lost on me. It's not a way for me to spend my time and money, but if anybody read it, please put it in the comics, drink, comments, and we will see what you thought. I'll do a couple more, and then I really need to drink some water, so then we will get to your comments. This is Green Arrow by Chris Condon, who's also writing Ultimate Wolverine, and art by Montos, colored by Adriano Lucas, with letters from Hassan Otsman Elio. Y'all, this comic is so good. This was such a quick reading issue, and yet I read it. It took me a long time to read it because I lingered on every panel. To me, this absolutely feels like it throws back to the style of one of my favorite comic books of all time, Mike Grell's Longbow Hunters on Green Arrow. Like, it feels like it's in this style. It has this amount of texture. It feels like Montos is doing a Grell riff, and I love it. This is an ongoing plot about Green Arrow was briefly on the executive board of this company that has poisoned a community, and all the people, are sick, they have cancer, they're dying. And so a whole number of people from the community are acting as vigilantes under the same mask to try to kill all the executives who made that happen. But Green Arrow was just an executive, like, for the day. He was just like a caretaker executive, and he is dealing with personally if he feels responsible, but he's also dealing now with somebody trying to kill him who thinks he's responsible. Absolutely love this art. It's so reverent of Grell, but it's so specifically its own thing. Adriano Lucas is coloring it so well. I love this panel story. Look at the panels across this. We see him coming in for the swing with his hand. The next panel is almost continuous to that panel. It shows the same basically figure in the foreground that he's punching, but actually his whole torso has moved. That hand that was cocked back with a fist in the panel before is the hand doing the punching in that panel. His head and his shoulders have shifted. It's showing us that he is moved in the space, even though with the foreground, it's telling the continuous story of the person who's pinned down on the ground who has not moved in space. And then we zoom out on the third panel to show us him cocking his fist back again to show us that the action is still moving. Notice the 3 points of action. 2 points of action with his fist cocked back, 1 point of action with the fist impacting, so that we infer the movement in between the panels. He doesn't have to show us the fist pulling back again, because we already know that that's what happened, because it's leading to him getting ready to punch again, and then reversing the shot to behind his head, and then reversing that again to in front of him to explicitly break the 180 rule, but to give us a full understanding of the physicality happening in this scene. This issue had my favorite art of possibly any comic book this week. Montos is a superstar, and Adriano Lucas is doing a fantastic job coloring him. This is a hair out of my top 10. I think it is a tremendously good arc that is extremely, extremely reverent of amazing Green Arrow stories that have passed. We'll do one more, and then I'll take my break and take a look at the comments. This is, I think I said comments that time. This is Green Arrow. No, this is Green Lantern by Jeremy Adams, with art by Jack Herbert and colors from Romulo Fajardo Jr. and letters by Dave Sharp. Here's the problem. All these characters on this cover here just got spun off into Green Lantern Corps last issue, right? And so I really like Green Lantern Corps. So I thought this was all going to be about just Hal. It is about Hal in part, but Hal is just doing the same thing the Green Lantern Corps are doing, which is chasing around these people that are newly manifesting emotional spectrum all around the universe. This also is a really fun B story about Kyle Rayner and Superboy going to the Source Wall, which was really, really great and had really good art. And honestly, why can't I just have a Kyle Rayner comic? Because you know that I don't care about Hal Jordan, but I just was like, why did you spin off a second comic book if you're just going to tell the same story with Hal Jordan, who is by far the most boring of all these Green Lantern characters in the main comic book? I had to like triple check that I hadn't gone back and read an issue of Green Lantern Corps from last week, because they're telling 2 parts of the same story. I just thought Hal was going to be doing something else. It made me so like frustrated and annoyed. And this is a comic book I've been loving, but it kind of feels like it exported all of the good parts of it out to Corps, and we're just left with this like confusing remainder Indiana Jones Jones stories with Kyle Rayner, who I do love, in the main title. So I can't say that I love this issue. I think if you're spinning off a second book, it is not a good look to come back to the first book and tell the same exact story you told last week in your second book. Jeremy Adams, I've been on your side. I've been rooting for you. We're all rooting for you. Okay, let's see what you've been up to in the comments. And I'm going to take a long sip of water while I scroll up. Okay. Let's see what you have been up to. James Dead Girl 4 was pushed to next week. Okay, well then we will read it next week. Lance McNair saying, I know I'm not a manga reader. I would recommend Witch Hat Atelier a shot. Gorgeous artwork, and the themes are so poignant and relevant to the human experience. Well, actually, relevant to that Green Arrow artist section I just did, manga isolates different moments, not only in physical action, but even in the everyday movement of characters through space that sometimes befuddle me. I'm fine with the left to right reading, but sometimes I get confused in manga because I don't understand why they're showing the action that they're showing. I've had long conversations with manga fans about it. I have to change my whole nature of what action I focus on and linger on, even in a slice of life manga. I did read a couple pages of the slice of life manga this week where somebody is learning how to speak English by watching RuPaul's Drag Race, which could not be more up my alley. But then it turned out to be a sex manga, which, okay, fine. But I thought it was going to be a manga about Drag Race. Tim Burnham, I love the Department of Truth, but fell off it after 3 arcs. I'd like to get back to it sometime. It's a great binge. It's a really great binge because honestly, the difference between those big rocks of plot and those tiny pebbles of plot works much better when you're binging, so you don't notice it as much. I do not think it is satisfying at all to read as single issues. Let's see. Ryan Wilson, I heard people hate on this issue of Detective. What? I heard Tom spent too much time lecturing us. No, that's bullshit. I mean, lecturing us that putting kids in prison is bad. I think that was just the plot. People get so up in their... this is not directed at you, Ryan Wilson. I never want to feel like I'm lecturing anybody in the comments. I'm just saying people get so up in their feelings when Tom Taylor takes like a perspective in any of his comics about any kind of social issue, but he's usually taking that perspective from the perspective of the characters. Like these are literal social justice warriors. I felt that there was a moment that I'm like, oh, is this going to become like a polemic about like kids being in prison? But I felt like it stuck very close to Batman's opinion on that and Damien's opinion on that, which is for me ultimate why it works. And if he is preaching to us, good. That's what comics are for. Go back and read Superman #1. So Ryan, I just never get it. Tom Taylor can be unsubtle, and I will give you that. But anytime anybody said Tom Taylor is preachy, the only time he's gone all the way over to the preachy side where it's annoyed me is like, I feel like in X-Men Red, they got to a point where it was just like, acceptance is great. Everybody loves each other. And it didn't feel specific to the characters or the opinions of the characters. It just felt like he was giving me this like huggy cartoon about acceptance every month. That's when something feels preachy to me, when the message of the comic feels disconnected from the words and the actions of the characters in the comic. I did not feel like that was the case in Detective this week. Oh, a lot of crosstalk. Tiger Eyes, I also thought it was cliche for the journalist to wear a beret. You mean in Dust to Dust? Tiger Eyes, I love you. It's almost Tiger Eyes poll time, y'all. It's my most wonderful time of the year. Side appearances need to leave Elektra alone and let Erica Schultz do her thing with Elektra over on the various Daredevil Elektra titles. Oh, I remember the other one that had her being psychic. It was this week's terrible Women in Marvel one-shot. Boy, if you want to hear me do some screaming, stick around because there'll be some screaming at the end of the show. Yeah, that was the other one that said she was psychic. Leave our girl Elektra alone. James Abel, Fantastic 429, best issue of the week. Everyone needs to read it. The metaphor and messages here was written so simply that kids of all ages should be able to understand. But also that thing when those people that the thing happened to the people that happened to the people, I could not believe that Ryan North did that in Fantastic Four. But yeah, I'm glad to hear it worked for other people. I was thinking that people might think Fantastic Four was too preachy because it feels very set in present day America, let me tell you. But it really worked for me. Death Goddess is the second one-shot. Dark Veil was the first. The third, Vampire Queen of Miami, just finished its Kickstarter. Oh, okay. Are they titty comics or do they have plot? Are you aware? Please chime in if you know about the titty status of the comics. Okay. Fantastic Four, hell yeah, so good. Can also be read by some very current commentary. Very much so. Ryan Wilson, I wonder how the Doom event would affect the FF series. It seems really like Ryan North has enough gas in the tank for both. Rexmo, Tynion doesn't seem to map out every issue before starting production in a series. Agreed. He says he prefers to see where the characters take him. I appreciate that as somebody who's written some fiction, which is not published, but I've written. I appreciate the idea that when you develop a character enough, sometimes the character makes decisions that you do not agree with. So I like that he does that. But I think that he doesn't, Sometimes I think he gets to an issue and he realizes the characters aren't telling him anything for that issue after they have been for a couple issues in a row. And then he realizes there's no content. I really have seen that happen across multiple. Something's killing the children. I've seen it on what are we talking about? Department of Truth. I feel like it happened a couple times in Nice House on the Lake. I think for somebody who I love and revere, honestly, if we're being honest, have a little bit of an intellectual crush on top of all of that, it doesn't mean he's flawless. And I still have things that I don't always love about him. And that is that thing. Ryan Wilson, editorial ruins so many good stories. I wonder if One World Under Doom would hurt FF by North. Well, what's interesting is supposedly they asked him to do One World Under Doom, and it wasn't an outgrowth of the Doom story in Fantastic Four. They just asked if he would want to do it, I think is the way that I heard the story told. So I don't think it's that classic Marvel editorial thing where they've like pulled something out of a comic to make it happen separately. And I think maybe that's when it's going to work. Lance McNair's on the first trade of North's F4. I love how he writes the team, how his issues are standalone, fantastic work, and my favorite modern Big Two comic. Yeah, it's just month after month excellence. And I feel like I'm not seeing as much outstanding glee about it as I expected to. I thought maybe it was because people were trade waiting, but we're like 4 or 5 trades deep now. I need everybody to be making some noise about how good Fantastic Four is everywhere, because it'll end when it ends. We're already into, the late 20s. It'll go to almost 40 issues and then I'll move on. Nobody writes for more than 50 issues at Marvel anymore. But I just want Marvel to understand that this is a comic they should be making, and that there's writers like North out there, like Rainbow Rowell out there, who with that new She-Hulk omnibus, that are really good at slice of life stories that are 1 and 2 shot, but also have action and also work for our superheroes. James Abel, FML4, this issue showcase of the power of motherly love for their kids in a unique and very interesting way. The issue also gave me some Zoe Thorogood vibe with art. Completely agreed on that. Ryan Wilson, I gave up on the Flash series a while ago. Just couldn't get into it. It felt it would probably been better in trades. I would agree with that. Just didn't feel the Flash and hated that they took off Jeremy Adams. Yeah, I think Jeremy Adams was a good thing going on Flash. I'm not convinced Spurrier is a great fit. Tim Burnham, I'm not sure I've been, but this is the first I've heard of FML and it sounds amazing. Tim, you know me, it's my favorite comic. So it might not work for everybody, but if you're looking for a comic that would be Krisis's favorite comic, and you know what you're getting from that because you know me, it is my favorite comic book. Tiger Eyes. Oh, I'm so happy you love it. Yes, FML is great. I haven't read issue 4 yet, but the first 3 are great. Tiger Eyes and I don't agree on everything, but I so respect the depth of his reading knowledge and his opinions. And I like when we disagree because it's sometimes in fun ways, but we do have a huge overlap. So I really am excited when I have something that I think is like off to the side that not everybody's going to love. And then Tiger Eyes validates it by saying he likes it. That makes me very, very excited. Like I'm like actually giddy. Every time I say Tim Burnham, my pea brain hears Tim Burton. We never know because my diction is never that wonderful at this time in the morning. Kane, best slice of life manga is Yokohama Kaidashi Kiku, Yokohama Shopping Log. It's so chill and crazy and easy to read for any manga reader from beginner to veteran. Okay. Logan Wayne, thank you. I've never understood SJW as an insult. Yeah, I mean, if we didn't like social justice warriors, why would we be reading comic books? Because aren't the most superheroes social justice warriors by definition? That's a badass thing to agree. I agree. Trans rights are human rights. Okay. Lance McNair saying, which of the live action X-Men castings do I like best? I love Ian McKellen as Magneto. I think we're so used to seeing that Jim Lee Magneto who's like built. He's got the huge man titties that I hope YouTube doesn't demonetize me if I say titties more than 5 times. That I think that everybody wants this like big attractive Magneto, but I love the weariness and the humor and the playfulness that McKellen brought to it. But I mean, Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier, he was always meant to be Professor Xavier. I love reading X-Men comics and doing my Patrick Stewart's voice. He's British, but I'm not doing my best version right now, but he tends to, it's like, take us there, number 1. I don't know. I'm not doing my best version. I need actual Professor X dialogue to do it. Tim Burnham says, I feel like Tom Taylor is about as least preachy as one can be when touching on a potential societal hot button topic, but that's just me. Max Appleman, he's got to get to bed. This is late in the Netherlands, but having fun talking. Go watch his new Beetle Bop, and he will see the rest of it and all of your comments in the morning. Oh, I don't know if I've said hi to Matt Hawk yet today. Thank you for all the work I put into the show. Reading Prep Act, it's such a great time every week. It's a great time for me, and it takes a lot of work. And oh my God, we're only at the F's right now, or the G's, and we're at an hour and 45 minutes, but I love this. Look, truth be told, I don't know if I can keep this up all year. It is a tremendous, I almost said crushing amount of work. Here's the thing you can do. It's really helpful if you subscribe. It's great if you like the video because it helps more people see it in the algorithm. So if you're watching right now, there's 60 of you or more watching right now. So if you could that would be really helpful. But here's the thing that really, really helps. Telling somebody who doesn't know about it that it's here. Saying like, oh, there's this person I know that reviews every single comic every single week. Do you think you would like that? Or saying like, hey, there's somebody who really talks about art and coloring a lot. I know you've wanted to learn more about coloring. Or saying, hey, there's somebody who often takes a queer perspective on comics. Do you think you would like that? If you can find somebody who's not already part of our YouTube circle to watch the show, that is huge for me, because if it's always just the same group of us, the numbers will eventually go down, and that's attrition. And what we need is for the numbers to grow, so I have more viewers and more potential budget to do more crazy stuff with this channel and with Crushing Krisis. Again, like if you love Crushing Krisis, huge. If you signed up for the Patreon, huge. But you know what you could do that's almost in literal dollars worth as much as signing up for the Patreon? If you just link to Crushing Krisis on a website that's not just like Twitter or Reddit, although that always helps. But if you link it, if you're like on a forum somewhere that can be seen on Google searches, and you're like, oh, by the way, I used Crushing Krisis to find this, that helps my visibility so much because of the SEO benefits that it brings. So if you have $1 or $2 to spend on the Patreon, I hugely, hugely appreciate it. I'm almost caught up enough on all this other reading stuff in the background that I'm ready to do some new guides. But if you don't have the money for the Patreon, or if you're one of these people who occasionally say, oh, should I pay $10? I know there's not a benefit up there. I'm like, oh my gosh, use that money for comics. But something you can do that's really, really helpful is just on some website where you are, not in a spammy way, but just in like in a way, a place that you would normally talk about comics or pop culture or anything, reference Crushing Krisis. Hugely, hugely helpful for me, worth literally actual money to me in the results it produces for Crushing Krisis in the long term. Okay, and then I think I am caught up. Except for Jarn Parles, is there a version of the show where I only talk about plus minus 20 comics? I don't know what that means. Do you want me to talk about more comics or less comics? You tell me what you meant, and then I will figure it out. Okay. And now let's get back to the talking. Next up is Green Lantern Dark. I didn't read this because it is an alternate universe, but I did update my DC Elseworlds guide, which I'm pretty damn proud of. It doesn't have every Elseworld, but it has a lot of Elseworlds. And this is actually, I discovered the future of an existing Elseworld, which I thought was interesting. Also, it's drawn by Werther Dell'Edera, who let him out of the cave where he's drawing all the issues of Some Things Killing the Children. Wild that he has time to draw more than one series. But next, we are going to go to Grimm Fairy Tales. They really have some of the best cover artists in the business. Their covers are always so, so cool. Unfortunately, the interiors do never quite keep up the promise of the covers. And sometimes I think it's a coloring thing, but so often the artist colors themselves in the covers. But y'all, if this looked this good in the interior, we'd all be talking about it. But the interior, it's fine. It's okay. This was actually a pretty good page, and so that's why I picked it. But this is a book, however, that is very good at telling 1 and 2 story arcs, and I appreciate it for that reason. It's one of the reasons I really, really enjoy it. But this issue actually, and what issue are we on here? 93, had a specific problem that often is the thing that I think is holding this comic book back. Everybody knows who this main character is, Sky Mathers, who's diving through the air there. She's like kind of like the heir of the magical worlds. But there's all these other magical characters who are at this this school that they have in the suburbs of Philadelphia. But the comic, when it introduces them on panel, and a lot of this issue was about them, it never gives their names. It never says what their powers are. It never says where from the pantheon they're from. It just, and I've read all of this series, like all 9, well, I maybe skipped 10 issues somewhere, but I kind of know who they are, but I don't remember what their whole deal is, or why they're friends, or which magic powers they have, or which Grimm fairy tale thing they're from. Why can't you just introduce me to the damn characters? I've had this problem with this series actually since like issue 20. The Zenescope has a huge continuity. There are so many characters in the Zenescope world. Sometimes they've had separate one-shots. Sometimes they've been developed in this book. And I just don't understand this like willful abstinence of ever telling us who they are. They're cool characters. I know that I like them. I just don't know who they are. I sometimes need a reminder. But again, I think the series is a lot better than anybody gives it credit for. And it's funny that everybody thinks it's going to be like a cheesecakey comic, because then in the inside, it's not that cheesecakey. It's just like fun female protagonists living their life. Now we come to Harley Quinn. Another issue that I saw people really hating online this week. And I'll tell you, man, stans of characters are bad for bad. They're bad. They're bad for this industry. They're bad for comic books, because I think I figured out after the fact that the reason that people did not like this issue and the plot of this issue is because it portrays Harley and Ivy as being in an open relationship, which is already happening in Gia Wilson's Poison Ivy. But people seem to have a problem when it also happens in the Harvey comic, and people are like really bent out of shape. I think this book is funny. I think Elliot Kalan is writing one of the most relatable, funny human versions of Harley we've had in main continuity for a long time. And I think that Mindy Lee is an artist who absolutely can land all the jokes. I will agree that the coloring from Triona Farrell is a little bit weird here. She's drawing Poison Ivy like she's Starfire. A few times I thought it literally was Starfire, or not drawing, but coloring, because her skin is like so red. That's not actually her skin tone, I don't think. But what I really liked about this is it was playing a very Deadpool beat of Harley arguing with her internal monologue, and the beat worked. It was funny, and it didn't feel derivative of Deadpool. It felt like it existed for Harley. Also, the two of them go up against Professor Pig, who is a disgusting, misogynist, violent, child-murdering villain, and it managed to make him fun in the context of the story while never totally letting go of the fact that he is that terrifying and horrific, which I think you have to do when you use him. You can't just cartoonify him. I think Elliot Kalan did both. I think Elliot Kalan is really, really talented at this Harley Deadpool kind of vibe. If you don't know who he is, apparently some podcasty person, which I don't know anything about, but he was the person who wrote Spider-Man and the X-Men that has the whole, don't you want to cure cancer? No, I just want to turn people into dinosaurs. He's really funny. I think he's good for Harvey. And I hope all these people who like can't deal with the fact that Harvey and Poison Ivy are obviously in an open relationship, not only for plot reasons, but just for the convenience of being able to have Harley have romantic crushes on other characters. I hope they can get over it so we can just enjoy a good Harley Quinn comic, which I really think this is. Okay. Oh, now we come to, hold on. Oh, I see. I see what John Paul's saying. Like if the show gets to be too much for me to do, hopefully I would keep it around with a smaller pull. I think that would absolutely be possible. I know that I'm going to try to do this full pull all through March. It might be that I drop some stuff and they get smaller that way. It might be that I only choose 10 books that I'm going to talk about, but we still kind of scroll through all the books. I don't know, just because it's a lot of time and effort and it's a lot of money, but I'm really enjoying it. And it makes me feel like alive and connected to the internet in a way that makes me really happy and connected to all of you. So I'm not like threatening you that it's going to go away. I'm just saying purely from a time expenditure and money expenditure standpoint, I don't know if I could do it 52 weeks in a row, although wouldn't that be cool? But thank you so much for clarifying what you meant there. Okay. This is Hellcats. She's got some abs. This is an abs book, but I did not see it digitally. I actually did look for it and couldn't find it digitally, so I didn't get to read it. Next is Hellhunters from Marvel, and this is set during World War II. There's demons, there's Nazis, there's Ghost Riders, and this one has Bucky, and it's playing this new beat of Bucky where Bucky is kind of like this little kid sociopath, which has been kind of how he's been recharacterized in the Winter Soldier era and beyond, that he was always like a crazy violent kid, and that was just kind of happening off screen for us in some of the comics. This comic, Philip K. Johnson makes a great joke about like he's not even old enough to enlist. Like, why is he even here? And it's like because he's good at shooting stuff. But I love Adam Gorham's art. I think it's really good, and I think that Frank Martin has really settled down and figured out like how it should be colored here. So I think this issue is gorgeous. Ultimately, plot-wise, look, there's not that much significant happening here. I mean, there's a Ghost Rider, there's Logan, there's Nick Fury, there's Captain Carter. We've basically just taken a whole gaggle of every possible character available to us in World War II France on the ground and just put them into a comic together as kind of a, I don't know if, I guess this would be after the Invaders. I don't know if the Invaders happened before or after D-Day or if they happened continuously, but honestly, like, fine, like, let's do this. Let's have an ongoing Hellhunters comic, but I just wish there was more to it. Like, basically, they're just chasing some demon Nazis, maybe. It doesn't really feel like there's enough of a plot and there's nothing interpersonally happening with any of them. I wish it would kind of foreground the Ghost Rider a little bit more and let us get to know his character more. It's really interesting that this soldier just died and was brought back by a spirit of vengeance. Like, let's linger on that for a little bit. I think there's something there, but it just feels very procedural and like we're just going through the motions of taking them through, you know, Nazi occupied France, which fine, that's fine. But it feels like there's a lot more that this comic could be that it's just not quite there. So Hello Darkness, I pulled it up. I pulled up a preview page because I was like really going to read it. And then I discovered that it has an ongoing Something is Killing the Children story that's on its fourth installment. So I wasn't just going to start reading with issue number 8. Then I also noticed that the lead story is from Marguerite Bennett, who I'd been hating on Witchblade, and Luana Vecchio is the artist, who I am viscerally disturbed by her comic doll parts that's really focused on sex and sexual assault. I'm like, well, I'm not going to tune in for a Garth Ennis curated comic. I don't vibe with Ennis. Great author, not somebody I vibe with. That's going to have stuff from creators I specifically dislike, and then part 4 of a story from a book I do like. So Hello Darkness, not going onto the pull list, although I really did think I was going to read it, and then I discovered it was really bad. And now we come to more Ghost Rider nonsense. This is Hellverine by Benjamin Percy, art by Raffaellenko, who I really like, colors from Brian Valenza, and letters by Travis Lanham. This takes Dakin, also known as Akihiro, and has him inhabited by a Ghost Rider. Last issue for me was a little bit too much Ghost Rider nonsense. I want a book that's about Dakin. I love Akihiro. He's one of my favorite comic book characters. This kind of got there. It had a brief moment of him with Doctor Strange to give him a MacGuffin, but then it has him going back to the village where he was born, which is having a demon problem, and it did some decent mining of his history. I know that there's this like confusion and hesitance to make him as evil and bisexual as he was, because they were trying to like, you know, whitewash all of our characters that are queer characters so they can just be lovable. I liked when we let him be a little bit more evil, but I think you can play him as being violent and evil a little bit because he's inhabited by a spirit of vengeance. So I think that this is like right on the line where it's like almost a Dakin comic book that I want, and I'm rooting for it. And I think Benjamin Percy maybe is better suited to writing an Akihiro comic than he is to a Logan comic, but it's just not giving me the full Akihiro fantasy that I love about the character. That said, Ianco's a really good artist, and at least I'm getting a very good looking Dakin comic book because the art in this issue was fantastic from front to back. Hornsby and Halo, you heard me say last month that this book had one more issue to get on to my radar and make me like it before I dropped it. Well, folks, this issue, Peter Tomasi and Peter Snedbergs did it with John Kellis on coloring and Rob Lee on lettering. This finally sold me on where this book is going. And I think the problem was I thought we were getting one and done issues, but really this has been an arc. It just has been kind of disconnected because this resolved everything that's been going in the first 4 issues. And I kind of was like, oh, and you know what? It was a little too slow for me, but we got there in this issue. What does getting there mean? It means that these two characters actually had agency. It wasn't just that they realized that they were an angel and a demon literally, and that they could like talk to each other and have, because previously it was only happening for them as like a dream sequence almost, but they took that agency and they actually made decisions that weren't just being driven by their better or worse nature. It feels like for the first 3 issues, they were doing things just because they were good or just because they were bad. And I don't really like reading comic books about characters that have no agency. At that point, I can just read a Wikipedia summary. This issue felt like they were making decisions for themselves and about each other, and that immediately just made everything click for me because I've always liked the art, although I think it did have a little bit of trouble with action in the first issue, but I think Schneeberger has settled down and it works. And this was just really delightful. It was giving me great Good Omens vibes. If you like season 1 of the TV show Good Omens, or if you love that Terry Pratchett book, Good Omens, this is very much in the Good Omens vibe. It's got really fun heaven and hell stuff, and it just really snapped into focus here. So I'm really happy to be on board with it. And I genuinely really, really love this issue. The Human Fly, I haven't been reading this. There was 1 issue of it on Global Comics, but we're up to issue 3 here. What I think is really interesting is this was a Marvel comic back in the day, but I think it was based on an actual life stuntman that they just used as a Marvel character, but he retained his life rights. So now this is about that stuntman. I think he's a real life stuntman, but I would actually be interested in reading this. I'll probably read that issue number 1 on Global Comics, but I didn't see the other issues on Global Comics. I wouldn't have been able to get to issue number 3. Now we come to Iron Man by Spencer Ackerman. I really hate this comic book a lot. And one of the problems I'm having, first of all, this is Javier Pina on art, who's a good artist. He's got Alex Sinclair on colors. Personally, I prefer the original series artist, who is Ota. That artist, I think, is I'm more interested in drawing this. It seems like Pina really didn't want to draw the armor. Like this little shot of him towards the middle of the bottom of the page right there, that is one of the only examples of him in his armor that we got in the whole, that was close in the whole thing. It seems like he was much more comfortable drawing the character model of the Ironheart armor. And I thought it was weird that we like, Iron Man had a lot of action, but we couldn't really see him very clearly. I just think this book doesn't know what it is. Is it a corporate book? Is it a down on his luck Tony book? Is it a Tony team up book? I don't think Spencer Ackerman knows. I don't think the art, I think maybe he's trying to do something that's a little bit funny, but these are not funny artists. And I think these are action artists and he's giving them the wrong action. Also, this is one of those pages that I have those panel problems with. Like, why is this panel of Melinda May, the cavalry, why is that one inset like that? Why isn't it just a second panel? What do we get from seeing this character leaping from off panel beneath her? That I guess it's inset because she's looking on and that action happening. But then why are these panels separated? Why is that panel like leaning off of the page? Is it just to show motion of the sword? Because there is no, the motion of the sword is that he's laterally sending out a blast from the sword, but this panel's not leading our eye to the beginning of the next panel to show that happening. It's leading us off page. So then the motion of that lateral blast of energy that he's giving from the sword at the bottom of the page doesn't make any sense. This comic is riddled with problems problems like that. It's riddled with it's not badly made. It's edited okay. The lines read, but it's just like the action doesn't line up with the dialogue. The panels don't tell a story with each other. It just felt very clumsy to me for 4 issues, which I think is a really nitpicky thing, because a lot of people are going to see this and go, what? It's really high gloss. It's superhero. It's got a good amount of dialogue. It works. But to me, I just feel like it's not quite lining up in the way it needs to tell a story. And we've gone 4 issues now. I just think sometimes I just have a spidey sense that a run is dead on arrival and it's never going to turn into anything. And I'm really having that sense about this run right now. Okay, well, no, so this is the one page after all the action is over. Finally, we got to see the Iron Man uniform, which I love this current iteration of the design. But again, I just don't love the dialogue doesn't work. There's this whole ongoing joke about his AI and his suit is like this bargain basement open sourcey AI, and that Ironheart has better AI, but they keep telling jokes about how bad his AI is, and none of them made sense. Like every time I had to go back and reread the panel, and I was like, oh, I get, like this one, the AI says something, and then Ironheart's AI says, Mr. Stark, is your AI stupid? What a gross thing to say. Like, and it wasn't actually funny. So I think you've got to be funny if you want to make jokes, and I don't think Spencer Ackerman is funny, which is one of the problems. This is a one-shot, John Carpenter's Tales of Science Fiction. But you know what? I saw a train that maybe was going to have blood on it, and I got PTSD from Murder Train and Kill Train, or Last Train to Murder, whatever that horrible comic we read was a couple of weeks ago. So I didn't pick it up. I think I've had enough murder on trains. But now I get to talk about a comic that surprised me in a good way that I really, really loved. And this is called Jump Scare by Cullen Bunn. This is by far my top recommended go and check this out please of the week. It's got art by Danny Luckert that blew my freaking mind, and letters from Joshua Reed. I absolutely loved it. So apparently Cullen Bunn kicked off this Beyond Mortal universe last year with an OGN, an original graphic novel that I haven't read. But this exists in that universe, but you don't have to have read it, because I didn't even realize until I was done. And it's got a superhero who gets her powers from this like weird lingering eldritch god that's hovering over the city, Empire City, which is a city that does have supernatural stuff and superheroes in it. And she gets a power to manifest a weapon from a horror movie whenever she wants to. So she can, and she's a horror movie fan. So she just, any fight she's in, she's like, I'm going to have a chainsaw. I'm going to use the weed whacker. I'm going to use the axe of the scythe. And she just manifests it. It's so poppy and fun. I love that this violent, bloody world has so many pinks in it. I think that really, really worked for me in a really pleasing way. Also, I want to read you this first page because I immediately knew I was going to love the comic from the first page. It's a great first page. Empire City. Don't let the bright lights and gleaming skyscrapers. Let me do lips, teeth, tip of the tongue first. Lips, teeth, tip of the tongue, roof of the mouth. All right, here we go. Empire City. Don't let the bright lights and gleaming skyscrapers fool you. It's a dark and dangerous place. Take a wrong turn, look sideways at the wrong person, read the wrong forbidden incantation, or solve the wrong puzzle box. Again, like immediately letting us in that there's supernatural things happening. I'm in the second panel. I already understand this place. And the street cleaners will be scraping your guts and shredded skin off the pavement come morning. Messy job. But it keeps the unemployment rates low. Lets me know that this is like a grounded real world. There's people who have jobs to clean up after the superheroism that's happening. Lets me know that it's a little bit funny and quippy. Just when you least expect it, when you let your guard down, you're starring in your very own late night horror show. Cops won't get to you in time. Superheroes are too busy saving the world. Again, great detail. Lets me know this is a world with superheroes. This character does not consider herself to be a superhero. Don't worry though, because she, Jump Scare, is there. Love it, 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 love it. Like, oh my God, that page, I knew I was going to love it just on that page because it explained so well everything I needed to know that I was like, this scene is set. I completely understand what I'm getting into. And then it delivered on this art. Look at this art. Look at it. It's so good. It's so amazing. It's so gleeful in its carnage without just relying on blood. And the character is funny. She's like genuinely funny. I think that, and then there's these psychedelic pages like this one. I think Cullen Bunn has a certified hit on his hands. This is one of the best superhero books I read this week, but it's a superhero horror book. I love Cullen Bunn doing horror, but I like superhero and I like shared universe. This is Cullen Bunn doing all three together. Highest possible recommendation. I can't wait to go back and read that OGN because if it's half as good as this, I'm going to love it. This will go immediately into the top 10 if the number 2 issue is as good as this. I'm addicted. I actually read it twice, and I just think that Cullen Bunn set the stage so well. He pulled me into the world slowly but surely so that I was so interested that by the time he wanted to take a break and give me some character moments and some family background, I was secure in taking that break because I understood what the comic was. Justice League Unlimited from Mark Waid and Dan Mora with who colors those wonderful people? Tamara Bonvillain on colors and Ariana Maher on letters. This issue did not work for me. I'll tell you why. First of all, this cover is nothing that happened in the issue. It's a totally made up cover. Second of all, what I like about Justice League and what I liked about the first 3 issues of Justice League is it's focusing on characters that are smaller, that have their moments in the league, and it's showing us them in the orbit of the Trinity, of Aquaman, of the big characters. This briefly did that with Tefe Holland, who's a vintage Swamp Thing character, but it mostly was just montages of psychedelic colored action. It never gave me a moment to really sit and linger with any one character, except for a passage of Batman talking to Martian Manhunter, which is why, oh, sorry, I never started the clock, which is why they're on the cover, but they're not part of the A plot here. They're the B plot. So it was weird to imply that they were part of the A plot. I just didn't think this went anywhere. I don't think we learned anything about the league. It felt like the action was very amorphous. They go into the green, which is always a danger when you're trying to show action because sometimes it gets too psychedelic and too amorphous and it doesn't feel like you saw the heroes do anything. And I really felt like that was a problem here. This to me was everything that can be wrong with a Waid Mora comic book. It just felt too ephemeral, too psychedelic, too ungrounded. It really didn't have any moments with any character, so I didn't have any reason to have good feelings about it. I saw this right before press time. I don't know what it is. I think it was issue 8 of 8, so I missed the train, but it's called Katie Black Dragon. And I do think it's got very, very cool art there on the cover, so I'm going to try to see if I can figure out what it was about. There's another Antarctic press book, Kendra, who's apparently some kind of like warrior babe fighting some fantasy stuff, which is the kind of comic I like. And I did look it up on Global Comics. It's not there yet, but when it is, I'm happy to check it out. Now we come to the kill train. People all over the world join hands on the kill train, because that's what happened in this issue. That made no sense and was terrible. I mean, this is not campy good. And I think I read the first issue and my comment to you last month was like, hey, this might turn out to be like a campy good book. No, it's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It had 2 good ideas. The one good idea is there's this woman on the train and she like inadvertently defeats one of the murderers on the kill train, which are being used as population control in New York City. You randomly get on the subway one day and it's a kill train. And so it goes through the other people on the train to introduce them. And it's in the style of trading cards where her friend and her are picturing what they might be good at keeping them alive. Great device. It goes on for several pages. And then after we learn everything about these characters and who they are and like why they're going to act the way they act, then we don't use them at all. So why did you spend the time to introduce them trading card by trading card if you weren't going to use them? Also, it plays out this whole beat like that our main character used to be this like organizer and she used to like be more in charge of people in college. But then it tells us that, but it never shows us that. And it never actually explains why. It just gives it as exposition. So it's this character who we don't identify with at all, that we know nothing about. Waste pages and pages introducing all these other characters. And then basically there's just like a different serial killer in every car of this train. And they're just going to go car to car and figure out how to defeat all these serial killers. But the only thing the art is showing us is dismembered legs. Like there's so many ankles that are cut off at the ankle bone in this comic book. Like I don't even like, if you're going to do gore, show a variety of gore. It just was so... It had no point of view, I think, is my problem. Like, I never felt like we felt this character's point of view. And I never felt like the point of view, like if it was going to be silly and playful and toyetic and play with this idea of these characters as like superheroes that are regular people, this don't F with me grandma giving you the middle finger, then play that beat. Play the characters as toyetic, silly, superhero, everyday characters. But it didn't do that. And I think it's terrible. And I am officially dropping it. Lady Gunfighter Desolation #1 is from Coffin Comics, who make the Lady Death comics. I've kickstarted many of them, and I know they are not to my taste, but boy, they do have very cool covers. Little Batman month 1, which I think was scheduled to come out a couple weeks ago, must have been delayed. Same Bat Boy, last Bat issue. Long Cold Winter. So if you didn't hear me talk about this one earlier this month, or I guess it would have been last month at this point, I love this comic. I can't say that it's like a 5-star comic because it's a little weird, but it's exactly my kind of weird. It's written by Francesca Perillo, art by Stefano Cardoselli, and colors from Lorenzo Scaramella, with letters from Buddy Badwan, who was the writer of that other comic that I was talking about, a good lettering. it's a fever dream. It's like Tank Girl. It's about this person that's in the wastes of some future America where you need a subscription to air in order to breathe. But he's just this random mercenary, and he adopts this robot kid he's going to get to the promised lands. The robot kid has seeds that might create trees that might solve the world's oxygen problem. But things just happen, and they just happen in a pleasing way. Like robot kid is having a flashback about how he found the seeds. Okay. Now we have to amputate this guy's arm. Okay. Like, but now he's in a fight with death in the middle of the wasted plains of America. Okay. But it works because each one of these scenes fits as a place. They like tell you what they are, and it works because this whole comic feels surreal. So unlike Kill Train, where things kept happening and there was no payoff, it feels like each one of these scenes, whether they're humorous or grim or bloody, kind of pay themselves off, which is something I really appreciated. And I'm absolutely addicted to this art from Stefano Cartaselli and Lorenzo Scaramella. I think it's gorgeous. I'm so into this. It reminds me of like old school Ninja Turtles, and also just the colors, like the turn on a dime aspect of the plot. Like then they all get on a train and somebody's going to arrest him because he's worth a lot of money, and he's just on the train with his weird, what is his mask even supposed to be? It looks like an artichoke. I don't know. I love it. I love it. It's everything I love about weird indie comics all in one book. I'm just totally addicted to it. I forget, do I read it on Global Comics? I'm trying to remember if I bought it on Amazon or if I read it on Global Comics. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the comments will know, but I love it. I'm not saying it's a 5 out of 5 comic book. It is a weird, borderline stupid comic book, but it has good internal logic. So the borderline stupidity is campy. When you have good internal logic and you let the thing be campy and you let it have room to play out the joke, then it works. If you're Kill Train and you're trying to turn your campiness into something scary or tense, but it's not scary or tense, that's when campiness falls flat. Although some people like campiness that fall flat because they like that B movie quality. That's not me. I need it to like work on some level. All right, we're going to get through the M's, and then I'm going to take a break and see your comments. Magic Order, I will catch up on eventually once it's all over because I love Magic Order. It's my favorite Mark Millar series, but this was not the week. Metamorph of the Element Man, not the Elephant Man. Maybe it would be a better comic if it was about the Elephant Man. I fucking hated this. I hated it so much. And let me tell you why it's terrible. Because Al Ewing is doing a very faithful approximation of a Silver Age story here with Steve Lieber on art, who's great at delivering punchlines, with Lee Luffridge on colors and Ferran Delgado on letters. But the thing is, DC Silver Age comics were generally pretty bad. They just had random stories that didn't really go anywhere and had characters drop in and out, totally random. There's a reason we don't look at a lot of Silver Age DC comic books as being classics. We look at some of their artists as being classic artists, but very few of them are revered and remembered for their stories the way that Marvel Silver Age comics are. Al Ewing is deliberately writing a DC Silver Age comic, so he is deliberately writing garbage. It's not funny. The plot doesn't really go anywhere. There's no tension. It's just a lot of words on the page and a lot of random stuff happening. And look, if you like it, more power to you. But I am not interested in watching one of the best writers in comics imitate one of the worst eras of comics at a publisher. It's so incredibly pointless. I don't understand what I'm supposed to get excited about. Like Metamorpho's going through some stuff, his lady's broken up with him, whatever, but I don't understand why I'm rooting for him. Why do I care about this secret agent woman? Why? None of them feel real and fully realized because DC in the Silver Age didn't have real and fully realized characters. So why would we ape that today? It's not like a lot of people loved it. There's a reason that we don't refer to those stories anymore. I just don't understand. And I think a lot of people are saying they like it because it's Al Ewing and because Steve Lieber is great at these kind of comics, but I don't think there's any there. Hate it. Monstrous, I was thinking about catching up on Monstrous, or at least picking this up because it was a jumping on point. It's a new arc. But then I remember how much I hate this comic book. The thing is, I love the story. I love the epic fantasy story. I love Marjorie Liu. I hate Sanek Takeda's art so much. She does this thing. I've tried to show it on the stream before. I just don't think it comes across at YouTube resolution. I'll try though. She does this thing where she puts this texture on every single part of her artwork. But as if it's like on, here it is. You can see it's like little crosshatches. I can't go in any further. Oh no, I can go in further. But you're starting to get the artifacting from the JPEG, but you can see them, kind of these little crosshatches, the white, that's really there. She does it on every single page of every single issue. Over time, it starts to make me have a headache, and then I get physically nauseous, and I can't see anymore. It makes my eyes unfocus. And I kept thinking, maybe it's just for this arc, maybe it's just for the scenes. No, It's just the way that she draws this comic book. And so unfortunately, even though it's got a story that I love, and I've tried everything. I've tried putting a blur filter on my whole screen. I've tried reading it physical versus digital. I've tried zooming in. I've tried zooming out. It just makes me physically sick to read this comic book. So unfortunately, I cannot comment on Monstrous. And finally, Murder Kingdom. This comic is so delightful, y'all. Fred Van Lent, where have you been all these years? Let's get you back writing tons of comic books every month. You're a pro. I mean, it's goofy. This is not the best issue, but I just love it. It's art by Chris Panda, letters from my favorite letterer, Becca Carey, and Etta, and it's great. And it's about this Disney-esque magic kingdom where there's a series of murders going on. The murders are in the style that the characters get murdered in their Grimm fairy tale or classic fairy tale story, but they're being murdered for being on the cast in the place. It's so funny. It's got so many good punchlines. It's so great. I will say that this artist, Chris Panda, sometimes really tries to get away with not drawing any background. This is a comic that a page that has a certain amount of background, but even in this first full panel, like what is even going on with this dark lined vertical stuff on the right hand side? Are we seeing it through a doorway? Is it the wall behind her? It doesn't really matter. And he does that a lot in this issue, which I don't super love, but I love the way he draws figures. I'm a real sucker for figures who have that really thick white or black outline around them so they pop off the page. I really like artists who do that, and I just think it's a really funny story. It's like very much like a funny Cullen Bunn horror comic. It's just about who's killing these people in Disneyland, and like with all of the excess and all of the absurdity of Disneyland, and it really works for me, and it just puts a smile on my face. So I really enjoy pulling it every month. And that brings us to the end of the M's, so I'm going to catch up on your comments. Next, Imaginot says, rest assured, we, the Krisis kids, I don't know if that's going to stick. We're going to workshop it. We'll spread the gospel of my channel far and wide. James Abel did read Green Lantern Dark #3. I love the way Werther Dellert drew the characters in positions and angles that made you feel like it was part of it. I might catch up on it for the next issue because I'm really trying to find some love for Tate Bromball. He wrote this arc of House of Slaughter that like blew me away. And then I've tried him on other stuff and I haven't super loved it, but I know there's something there that I like. So I have a lot of patience for Tate Bromball comic books. Kane, Green Lantern Dark is on her wish list. James Abel, Harley Quinn 48. This is a big improvement from the last issue. I enjoy how he tried to tie it into Poison Ivy. Lance McNair, any plan on watching tonight's Oscars? I don't know what they're broadcast on here in New Zealand. I just watched the speeches after the fact. I don't need all that in-between stuff and all the tributes and all the... Apparently, they're not even going to have the best songs perform this time. They're just going to have them talk about their songwriting experience. I think they didn't want to feature some of the songs on the show. That's some BS. I want to see all 5 of the best song nominations played. That is part of why you watch the Oscars. Lance hates the term stan in general. I resisted using it for, I think, a solid 20 years. Now I try to only use it as a pejorative term or ironically. But for me, the difference between a fan and a stan is when I say stan, I usually am talking about somebody who cannot see the forest for the trees anymore about their favorite artist or writer or character or whatever, or comic book or publisher. All they can see is their love for it. Like they have no ability to step outside of that love and have a critical sentiment anymore. That to me characterizes stan culture. So actually on social media, I block stan accounts. Like if they're like Jean Grey fan page or whatever as a Twitter account or a Blue Sky account, they might be perfectly nice people. They might have very nice opinions, but I have no interest in interacting with somebody who can only interact with their character as they are my favorite without, and their only criticism for that character is they are not being portrayed in the way I enjoy them being portrayed. Ryan Wilson hates Harley Quinn anyhow, so honestly doesn't even care. Well, that'll do you. Lance McNair, I'm okay with Harley as a character. It's Joker I'm sick of. See, I weirdly love Joker. I think because I come from the 90s, and in the 90s, Joker was not that overexposed. I mean, he was in a lot of comics and there was Underworld Unleashed and stuff, but I didn't feel like he was this like oppressively overused force. So to me, a good Joker story, a story that like really plays with the danger of him, excites me a lot to this day, which I think a lot of people are like over it. Logan Wayne, people who call themselves stans clearly didn't pay attention to how that song ends. Agreed. Cruel Angel read Hello Darkness, so we'll go with their review. And please tell me what pronouns you prefer, because I say they until I'm sure. Hello Darkness #8. The wrap up to the war was pretty strange and abrupt. Oh, I guess that was the Something's Killing the Children story. Not sure why she reacted that way to reading his diary and then what he does at the end. Super Panda, gotta say, hey, while I'm on my lunch break, hope everyone has a great week ahead and may your only crisis this week be Krisis. Oh, I love that. That's a fun tagline. All taglines in the comics drink. All taglines in the comments could become property of Krisis if I think they're funny enough. No, that's not true. Actually, anytime I use any kind of contribution from somebody who helps me, even on Crushing Krisis, I try to find a way to compensate them. There was this one reader who like fixed a lot of little errors I had in guides because they had trade paperbacks from an era that I didn't have them from. And I actually wound up sending them a gift certificate to be like, yo, you put in so much time to like help my site get better, which is not me asking you all to go and find errors in my sites. I do not pay everybody who does that. But I mean, I don't like the idea of profiting off of somebody else's work in a meaningful way. If it's going to be meaningful for me, I like to find a way to compensate them. That's a good Captain America face. Oh, on the Adam Gorham panel from Hellhunters. Yeah, he's a great artist. I heard Hellhunters was good, although I don't know how I feel about them kind of. Well, it's not, Ryan, it's not a new Bucky retcon. Like, this has been the way people have been writing Bucky for like a solid 10 or 20 years now. I'm surprised people are liking it. It feels very lacking in content for me, but I think there's some people who just like a comic that is a war comic. And I think Marvel has room in their line for a war comic. And I think it's a good pitch for a war comic. I wish there was a little bit more plot at the middle. When was the last good Iron Man run? I kind of liked a lot of parts of the Duggan Iron Man run, but I fuck with the Cantwell Iron Man run. Christopher Cantwell, what was that? Iron Man 2021? 2020? I don't remember what year it was. I have a guide to that on my website, but I loved that. A lot of the art was by Cafu, colors from Frank DeMarta Jr. I love that run. Loved it. Cruel Angel, you're right. The stealth segment. Oh yeah, okay. Know that I know what you're talking about. Tim Burnham saying, is Sony still poor during this Iron Man run? Yes. James Abel also read Jump Scare. When a horror-obsessed person gets supernatural powers, you go on a killing spree. Front issue felt like it was written as an OGN first and then cut up for single issues after. Perhaps, since the first one was an OGN, maybe that didn't work, so maybe they decided to market this as singles. Lance McNair, Iron Man is a character I struggle to read. I've just never had the desire to read his solo comics. Yeah, I think it takes a lot to find an angle on him. He's a character now that I feel like we've done so many versions of. He's in S.H.I.E.L.D., he's poor, he's rich, he has amnesia, that it's really hard to find an angle, which is why I like that Christopher Cantwell run. I think it found a really good angle. Mall 360, how do I manage to read so many books a week? Just barely. This week, it took me every waking second. I had to pass up on some fun family time at one point because the books were just taking a long time to read. That's why I don't know if this is going to be forever. Honestly, though, it's because I don't start until Friday here in New Zealand, Thursday for you. If I actually just started on my Thursday, your Wednesday, I'd probably get done sooner, but I'm usually still doing Crushing Krisis work on that day, so I don't get to start. So I'm trying to like move everything up, which means maybe I'm going to pull some all-nighters this week to just try to get a couple days ahead. But what's hard is it's a treadmill. So if you just get behind one time, the next week is behind. So it's really challenging, but it also brings a lot of satisfaction, and I really like being able to do it with all of you. Speaking of comedy, what's my opinion on the current Marvel MCU humor? Totally disinterested. I just think that the punchlines are so quippy and pithy. I think that Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man humor has infected everything, and now we expect every Marvel book to be that quippy, and like that's not what the Marvel universe is, and I just wish we could see some texture. So yeah, I get annoyed with it when it's like pervades everything. All right, we got to get back to the comics. James Abel, Justice League 4, with your powers combined, I am Tefe Holland. That's a Captain Power reference. This issue trying to showcase how powerful she can be. Yeah, but it didn't really accomplish anything. Kill Train number 2, this issue was so dumb, I loved it. From the humor to the character names. Well, it did have some funny parts. It didn't get me over the top. I definitely far appreciated Jump Scare more than that. Ryan Wilson, I hate how Tefe Holland was built up for years to be this potentially powerful being and successor to Swamp Thing and then just forgotten. Well, then maybe you would like Justice League Unlimited number 4 because it definitely dealt with that. Okay, let's see. James Abel on Murder Kingdom. I spent way too long just to see if there was any connection with this issue and the ABC murders. There had to be a reason they showed that book in this issue. Oh, I don't know. That was totally lost on me. Oh my gosh, more talking. Hank, in this day and age, I find those Silver Age comic book stories a welcome escape. Simple, goofy, one and done fun, uncomplicated. Yeah, but I think there's something about emulating an era that we have nostalgia for and not bringing any modern learnings or sensibility to it. I think that's why I'm having trouble with Metamorpho. Scriptured, I am reading Tate's new Batgirl series. I absolutely despise it. Great art, though. I think the writing is dog crap, but you'll hear me talk about that the next time an issue comes out. The old version of the Joker, says Kyle the Mighty, was much better when he showed up maybe once a year or so. It was just scary and also comical. Now he's just tiresome. Yeah, I think he got a little overexposed the past few years, but I still liked it because I like Joker. The only time I don't like him is when the way that Tynion used him on Justice League with Scott Snyder, where he's like, I'm going to team up with all these other villains and have a master plan. I don't like that. I want him to be an agent of chaos who just floats in and out of people's lives. I like that version of the Joker. So I don't like when he gets too connected to other stuff at DC, or when we do Dark Knight's Metal. I basically hate Scott Snyder's idea of Joker. Tim Burnham agreeing that he loved Campbell's Iron Man. Lance McNair agreeing he liked Joker back in the 90s. How about the Crushers? Oh, as my fandom. Krisis and the Crushers. We'll think about that, and we'll come back to that, because that's where I'm going to leave off in these comments, because y'all, we're at 2 hours and 30 minutes. We're only at the ends. All right, here we go. Nightclub number 2, I didn't read. It's by Mark Miller. I have no idea what it is. I'm not catching up on all this Miller nonsense all at once. Knights 13. Okay. So I decided this billed itself as a jumping on point, and I decided I was going to give it another try, because that issue number 1, I just felt like I really liked the concept, the art and everything, but I just couldn't like understand where the dialogue was going. So I decided to dip back in. I'm so glad that I did. I loved this issue. I think because it took a step back and it told us the background of one of the characters. So it really focused on just one character. It had less of that snappy dialogue that I was having trouble following. And it really let Luigi Formisano stretch out on art. The art in this was beautiful. I love the colors from Francesco Segala, and the lettering, or the coloring assistance by Gloria Martinelli, and lettering by Maria Letizia Mirabella. A lot of Italians in this. I love to see my people working hard. Written by Wyatt Kennedy. It just worked for me. It told the past of the supernatural agent who has basically been keeping supernatural under control and has to make some very tough decisions. It shows his confrontation with a witch. It shows his kind of supernatural agency, but it leads it with interesting information, basically telling us we've already met this character in the present day and he died, which immediately makes me interested. Like, oh, well, then why are we looking at his background? And it really got me back into this. It gave me faith that this comic does have cool Buffy the Vampire Slayer vibes that I am interested in. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to try the rest of the first arc. Maybe issue number 1 was just a little too frantic and manic for me, but if this is the quality of the artwork and the writing that the series has grown into, maybe it was just, you know, a tough birthing period for that number 1 for this creative team. But I actually really enjoyed it, and I think you could just pick this up totally without knowing anything else in the series and enjoy this. It's a really good one and done issue. Really, really delightful. I actually had this like in my to buy, about to click 1-click order, and then I saw it was written by Jimmy Palmiotti, and he has upset me so much on Deadly Tales of Gunslinger Spawn with the violence against women, that seeing a woman on the cover of this comic and his name gave me like literal like triggering. I was like, oh, like I got like a little like wincy and nauseous, so I skipped it. So good job. Power Girl by Leah Williams. Here's the thing. Leah Williams is a good time gal as a writer. She just writes some funny, quippy stories. I don't believe entirely that's who Power Girl's supposed to be. And the effect that I'm always getting from this comic is her supporting cast is amazing, and I don't know who the lead character is. David Baldion, as I talked about last month, is doing career best work, I think, on this title. The colors from Romulo Fajardo Judah are amazing. Becca Carey, my favorite letterer. There's so many funny moments in this. He sells the humor with their facial expressions so much. There's so many ongoing gags. Power Girl leaves her unpowered friend, and she's like, well, who wants to play board games with me? And all these like hunky Asgardian guys raise their hands. It is funny. And this is a team that knows how to sell humor. Unfortunately, I just don't know if Leah Williams ever figured out why Power Girl has a comic book. And I've heard, I think through the grapevine this weekend, that this has been canceled, which, you know, 20 issues is a fine run, which is, I think, is what it's going to get to. So if you're canceled at that point, there's nothing to be ashamed of. What there is to be ashamed of is you wrote 20 issues and you never reminded us why Power Girl exists as a distinct character from Superhero Girl or Supergirl. And I think that, unfortunately, it is no good. So I read this second issue of Power Lords. This is so funny. It's part of that Nacelle-verse that are a bunch of individual toy lines that this guy bought the IP rights to, and he's trying to mash them together to make a Hasbro line. So it's written by Matt Hodson, pencils by V. Ken Marion, and inks from a whole bunch of different people, and then colors from Andrew Dalhouse, who I love, and letters from Taylor Esposito. What's funny about this is it's so toyetic in that it really is, it pretends you know who these characters were as toys, and then they do something like squirt water or like grow really tall, and it seems like an in-joke, like, oh, if you had this toy, you would know it squirted water, except for these toys existed for such a brief period of time, much like Rom, that like no one has the toys. No one knows that. And I actually found that really kind of charming. Like, I like comics that deconstruct in that specific way, where they're like, I'm pretending this is a comic that's a tie-in to a thing you're familiar with, but nobody's familiar with it, but I'm still pretending. I actually really like that. The art was pretty engaging. I will say it's kind of a nothing story. Like, this guy used to be part of the Power Lords because he had this gem that made him a Power Lord. Like, all these people have gems, but he lost his gem. So now he's trying to re-get the gem. So he double crosses them people to get the gem, but the Power Lords maybe don't want him back. Some of the action got a little unclear at points, like it was showing the wrong part of the action happening, but it's just a very fun toyetic comic book about toys that barely ever existed. So if that sounds entertaining to you, you might find it entertaining, but it's exactly that. Like, the thing you see here on this cover, you're like, oh, it's He-Man, but with a tank as a bottom. And it's a person that's just like a little red face on yellow limbs with no body. Like, if you see that and you're like, oh, that's cool, then you will like this comic book, because it is exactly what it is advertising itself to be. I did not read American Private from Antarctic Press. I did try Radiant Black. This was the week of forgiveness. I tried to go back to series that I had previously dropped or overlooked. In the case of Knights, I really found something I might actually love. I got to catch up on Department of Truth. I'm trying to burn some time down because I hate this comic book a whole lot. And I don't want to say mean things. No, I do. I like saying mean things. But here's the thing. I remember back when I read #1 of this comic by Kyle Higgins, and I remember thinking, gosh, it feels like it's supposed to be kind of a riff on Ultraman, but also a riff on Power Rangers, but also a riff on like Giant Robot. And yet it's so unfun. And I remember reading like 3 issues of it and just being like, there's nothing entertaining. Like, this guy is like a failed screenwriter and he's got a nothing life. And then he gets this power. The power is never really defined. And he gets to be this fly around Power Ranger guy and fight stuff. But it's like, how can you have a comic about that that's not fun? But then I know the Massiverse grew, all these other titles got added. It's made it to 31 issues, which is a major feat in this market. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe they found their footing. Maybe much like Knights, it got to be a better comic later. So I read this issue. It was so bad. Like, I don't even think this is me saying that like I found it bad. It just, there was all these moments with this character who's meant to be a loser, but it never told us why we should like him. That's the danger that I think writers who are not very good writers fall into when they were like Peter Parker fans for life, is they think the thing you're supposed to do is tell you that like, oh, this character's a loser, so love them, but it doesn't remind us why we should root for them. And I think there's a big problem happening here with that. Also, it has this gag where he's like trying to get rid of the arm of this giant robot that he fought, but he keeps putting it places people don't like it, and he keeps going back and moving it, but it's not actually funny, and the panels don't show clearly what's happening with the giant arm. So I couldn't even really tell what was happening. So the joke never landed. But then he just has like a police scanner on his phone and he's following it and doing all of these things, including saving cats from trees. Why? But then at the end, it's like, oh, because everybody hates you because you made this whole city get killed in the last arc. But nothing about it's internally consistent. So it's saying it's jumping on point. There's nothing to jump onto. It's playing him as this tonal loser. I have no reason to like him. And then the action isn't clear. It doesn't say what his superpower even is, and everybody hates him. But it just, nothing about it made sense. And there's nothing, not a single detail about this comic book that makes me want to read it ever again. It's just so uninteresting. And I remember feeling the same way about the first 3 issues. So if you're enjoying the Massiverse, please tell me what you like about it, because all I see is a complete lack of talent. Not only was the writing bad and the art was unclear, but there were clear errors in the lettering where it had bad tangents, where the word balloon was supposed to like meet a certain place on the panel and it didn't. And that really always bugs me, because like that stuff sticks out and pulls you out of a comic book. So yeah, horrible comic book, has been for 3 years now. Red Hulk, this worked for me in a big way, not just because G.F. Shaw's art was incredible. I think actually some of the best art I've ever seen from G.F. Shaw, and he's great. He's great on God Country. He was great on Donny Cates' Guardians of the Galaxy, but this was something else. But Benjamin Percy, I used to love Benjamin Percy. I liked him when he was writing Green Arrow for DC. I think Benjamin Percy has a very specific kind of thing that he's good at, and Wolverine and mutants are just not that thing. But taking him back to this Red Hulk, somebody very militaristic, somebody who's not like part of a minority, but he's part of the majority, and the way that he's dealing with the loss of his freedom and his power and his agency because Doom's got him locked in a basement somewhere, it worked so well. I felt the visceral anger. I love the idea that Doom is using all these captured superheroes and supervillains as a think tank to game out some of the moves that he's going to do, which is such a Doom thing, that he like does need a little help for something, but he would never admit it. And so they've got to be locked in his basement because he could never actually say he has an advisory council. And just like the way that this built up to a point that he was going to snap and break out and finally get to be the Red Hulk again, it had me on the edge of my seat. I think this was almost a perfect comic book. Personally, I would have liked it if it had 10 more pages to let us go a little bit farther in the story. I didn't really love leaving where we had to leave. I was so pumped at that point that I was like, oh, cliffhanger as a #1 issue. I just wish it was a little bit longer. But honestly, if that's my only problem with an issue is I wish there was more of it, then you did a pretty good job. Okay, Ripperland, I've not been reading its age. Steve Orlando, Dark Horse comic. People told me I would not like it, and me and Steve Orlando aren't always on the best of terms. This Rogue the Savage Land. Last month when we read this #1, pretty much everybody on the stream lost their minds about how good it was. Written by Tim Seeley with art from Zulema Scotto Lavina, colors from Rachel Rosenberg, and letters from Ariana Maher. It's set in that period where Rogue comes out of the Siege Perilous, which Chris Claremont didn't show until Uncanny X-Men 116 or 269, but it doesn't mean it hadn't already been happening. I think that's just when we saw it. So Tim Seeley is expanding that out and letting us see more of it, which is such a great beat. I will say this just felt a little back and forth. It didn't feel like we had quite as much time with Rogue. It felt like we just kind of were seeing a lot of conflicts teed up and like fighting. Some of the fighting was a little bit lost, like who was on what side, why did it matter? And it wasn't because I was reading fast. Like I went back and read it. I just think some of the intent of the characters didn't come through really clearly in the dialogue. However, the art in this is really good. I think Zulema Scotto Lavina, great find. I don't know what she was doing before, but she's fantastic on this series. I love how she draws Magneto. I love how she draws Rogue. I love how Rachel Rosenberg is coloring this. And I just find it a really engaging look at that period of X-Men in a story that really does have room to expand. Now we come to Sabretooth, The Dead Don't Talk, issue #3. This is by Frank Thierry. And you know what? I think there's a reason Frank Thierry is a writer that we don't see a lot of ongoing runs by, because I think his only perspective is let's beat people up. Like it doesn't, this was going in such an interesting direction. Issue #2 was kind of like playing out this Gangs of New York beat and this idea that in terms of the Century New York, that Sabretooth was the enforcer who was kind of thinning out the gangs. And like, is this a vintage version of modern supervillainism, right? But then this issue has them all go to Coney Island. They're all there for some reason. So then there's a gang fight, and then there's somebody from Kunlun. So Sabretooth has another superhero to fight. It just feels like it completely glossed right past the thing that was making this so special, which is that it was about a vintage version of superheroism. It was about thinning out those gangs. It was about what happens if you do lend superpowers to somebody to be the top banana in a period where superpowers weren't really a thing. And to kind of like move past that and immediately go to a big super fight between these two characters who, by the way, of course, because it's Frank Thierry, they stumble into a house full of sex workers and light it on fire. And then they decide in the middle of their fight that they want to have sex on the bed that's burning, because that's every Frank Thierry comic. So like, it was good. And I think Michael Stamaria is one of the best artists at Marvel right now, and he can sell anything. But I just, what is the point? What is the perspective? I just really was challenged by trying to figure out like, what is Frank Thierry trying to do here? Because I thought I understand that we were doing this low-powered Gangs of New York thing, and to just bring in another superhero and like make it so the gangs didn't even seem thinned out after this really bloody campaign to thin them out last issue made me really confused about like what we were even doing. So I tackled this with trepidation, The Savage Sword of Conan, because it was a 64-page black and white comic, and it was an anthology comic with 2 stories, but the first story of the Conan story is actually 50 pages. So then there's only a second backup story. But I got into it because written by Roy Thomas, pretty classic writer. Not everybody loves him, but he's a classic writer and a classic Conan writer. And art by Roberto Della Torre, who is the main artist that launched Conan, but he's not on the main book anymore. And it's based on a story, I think a story by Kipling. I was so gripped by this. I spent almost an hour reading this, which I know maybe doesn't sound long, but I read comics fast. 50 pages for me, and a comic that isn't that good would maybe be like, I don't know, 18 minutes, 22 minutes. And in a comic, even with really great art, maybe it would be like 30 minutes. The fact that it was an hour, and you know what, even though it was in black and white, never did I have a hard time following the action. Never did I have a hard time following the likenesses or the story. So much communicated. His art is so stunning, and to see it uncolored here after seeing how stunning it is colored in the early Conan issues by Dean White, one of my favorite colorists. I think maybe I was giving Dean White too much credit, because the art is just as good here. It tells this one-off story of Conan going to a city with this young woman who swears that she's a daughter of the chief of the city who had been sold off to marriage, but then had tragedy been befallen her, and that Conan would be bringing her back to a rich reward. Well, it's not quite what she cracked it up to be. Conan makes a friend with this other man who's a bandit in the city. They have some adventures. They leave the city together, but tragedy befalls them. it's so efficient in its storytelling. It's so efficient in its use of space and its framing of the characters, the way that it like uses the panel space to make somebody even as big as Conan feel kind of compressed and enclosed or small in the space of something big. I think it's one of the best Conan stories I've ever read. I was excited from front to back. It was absolutely thrilling. I love what Titan Comics is achieving with Conan right now. It is bringing me back to what I always thought would be exciting about him. And then I would read the Marvel comics and be like, oh, this is not all that I thought Conan would be based on his history of as this pulp fiction character. Titan Comics has it. I think they're making some of the best Conan that has ever been made. I've never read the Robert E. Howard books, so I would need my friend Felix, who's read the books, to chime in on if it like stands up to the books. But to me, this is giving me the fantasy of what I always thought Conan would be. Just extraordinary. Scorched, which is the Spawn team title written by John Layman. This issue was okay. What's happening is that it's reacting in real time to what's happening in the rest of Spawn, which is that the dead zones of hell have been unlocked. So everybody's starting to get their powers again. So the Scorched, who are really on the back foot last issue, basically get their comeuppance and have their powers. It's drawn incredibly well. Steven Segovia's art in this is so good. It's way better than I remember him being last time I saw him at Marvel or DC. Maybe that's down to the colors from Dene Ribeiro. I don't know. But there's really just not a lot of plot that's happening here. It's basically all of them were on the back foot and then they're like, ha, I got powers. That's pretty much everything that happened in this issue. The end. It does have a little bit of interesting B plot about medieval Spawn and medieval Spawn's identity, but it was quite sparse. So really this just was an action issue. But you know what? I'm really into John Layman lately. I love him on Titans. I think he's a very good team writer. So I'm willing to stick around because I've been really enjoying this, even if this particular issue was a little bit less exciting than last issue. Last issue was really fun. I think if you're going to pick up this comic, this is issue 38. You could pick up issue 37 to see if you like it, because it played with the narrative in this really fun way where it made it seem like it was a recap, but it was actually fresh narrative. It was just told in the style of a recap, which really worked. The season's number 2. A lot of people had things to say about this before the show was even started, which makes me think people were really enjoying it this week. I can't say that I did. This is one of those things where clearly Remender is doing like a multi-issue arc to start us up, and I ain't got time for that. Fine, we've been introduced to all 4 of these magical sisters. One of them is an archaeologist, so she's out somewhere and she's been lost. One of them is a fashion star. One of them is a painter, and this youngest one is a cook, but she can't get a job as a cook, so she's a mail carrier. Who cares? Who cares? So the archaeologist one is maybe kidnapped. Maybe there's a murder circus in town. This book didn't do anything. It's not telling anything. And it didn't actually make these out to be characters. It's just playing with this like slow moving whimsy. And that's just not my style. I can appreciate why you like it. I'm not saying it's a bad comic book, which I've said about other comics on the stream. I'm just saying slow moving whimsy is not my vibe. I think Paul Azaceta's artwork is great. I love the colors from Matt Lopez. The letters are good from Russ Wooten, but it's just too slow for me. And with Remender, who I know that I don't trust, I'm not going to hang on for 6 issues for him to get to the point. I think it's already a drop for me. It's not going anywhere. I don't like a comic where I get to the end of an issue or two and I say, I wouldn't mind if all these characters got slaughtered off panel and then the next issue was like, that team all died. We've got a new team, like how Ecstatic started out of X-Force. If I wouldn't care that anybody died, I'm not going to keep reading the comic. And that's where I am on this right now. That said, very adorable, very whimsical, very Miyazaki influence. I don't see where the creepy horror aspect's coming in, where they keep saying in the solicits that it's going to have creepy horror. You might like it, but I think I'm done with it. Sentinels. Sentinels, okay. So you pitch a comic. And you pitch that it's going to be about these 5 characters that were seriously harmed by past Marvel line-wide events, and that they would have a motivated reason to give up their bodies and their life and their agency to be sentinels, to protect this world from mutants, who, by the by, are not usually the ones responsible for most of these big Marvel events. But they had run-ins of mutants. I get it. Then you spend 4 issues making them all completely interchangeable. You can't tell them apart in the art. You can't tell apart their personalities or their voices. You don't actually take the time to explore very much of their backgrounds or how they got to this point. You just kind of say it and hope that we care about it. Then there's a whole subterfuge in this Greymaken Sentinel, facility, but the subterfuge adds up to nothing and doesn't pay off in this issue. Then you get to issue 5. It doesn't pay off anything about their personalities. It doesn't pay anything off about the Sentinel program. It doesn't pay off anything about what's going on at Greymaken. The only 2 payoffs is that, surprise, it connects to Justin Sifton, whatever, who used to be in the comic Sentinel, who's been dead for 13 years and literally nobody has thought about. Although I do enjoy him. That was revealed in issue 4. So to have the issue 5 hinge on him being there, but then nothing happens. He's basically like, I can control Sentinels. And then the comic book ends. Like there's no payoff. And then to have the whole Greymaken thing just basically end up with like, okay, I guess we're going to still enslave mutants. There was no point for this to exist. It didn't take us anywhere. It didn't tell us anything. It didn't tell us to feel anything. It didn't reveal anything about the X-Men. It was pointless. It had no point. It was badly made. And the thing that really struck me about this is on the first page, we just did this totally normal human scene that was a flashback. And on this page, the artist Justin Mason actually handled it well, and it was stories, like the storytelling worked. But then as soon as we go to superhero stuff happening, the likenesses get bad, the figures get sketchy, the action doesn't make sense because he's not a good artist for superhero. And I think if this book had been kind of like the deep like emotional dissection of why humans might turn into Sentinels that it promised it would be, he would have been the right artist. But instead the art looked like crap, and it just looked bad for him. It looked bad for Alex Packnadel. It looked bad for Tom Brevoort. It looked bad for Marvel. And if you like this comic, I question your taste in X-Men comics. I see all these people being like, oh, this is the cool book of the line. I wish it was still ongoing. If you think this is still ongoing, we're not friends, because this was terrible. And it's not just terrible because it didn't have mutants and because it was focused on the Sentinels. It was terrible because there was no reason for it to exist. We got to the end of 5 issues and it didn't actually take us anywhere. It didn't reveal anything. It didn't go anywhere. It was just like a little idea that never got developed. I hate it so much that I think I will forever be sour to comics from Alex Packnadel from this point forward, because he biffed it so hard on this, on a pitch that honestly could have been good. And if you say that this is your favorite book in the X-Men line, I might mute you on Blue Sky, because this was one of the worst X-Men comics that's ever been made, in my opinion. And this is not just like Peter's grading it on a curve because they did one thing he didn't like. No, I think every panel and every dialogue balloon of this comic book was bad. I don't read Star Trek comics. I almost decided to read this one because it's a one-shot and it was based on this new Star Trek series that's streaming on Paramount. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll just read it. And then honestly, I looked at the preview page and it had this long summary of like all the stuff that it was connected to and like reference. And I was like, I'm not even interested in this preview page. I did read so this is kind of funny because I've never seen Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. It's the only Star Wars movie I guess I haven't seen the Han Solo movie all the way through. But I tried watching it on Disney Plus and I made it like 2 minutes in and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This is garbage. But Jodie Hauser, in my experience, does a really good job of editing in the right moments when she adapts something from one of the TV shows. She did a great job adapting the Obi-Wan show and like making it only focus on the beats that needed to be focused on. I wish I could see her edit of the story as the show, because the art in the comic was terrible. So this has art from Will Sliney, who's a really great artist, and he's a really good Star Wars artist. So I was like excited. And you know what? I do think the art was great. And I do think this really pared down the story in a way that made sense to me. That said, now that I understand what the story is about, because I truly didn't know, like I've only ever read like a Wikipedia summary of the art of the movie. It's just too dumb to live. But the thing that Jodie Hauser is doing that I think will make this worthwhile to you if you like the movie, or even if you dislike the movie but have watched it, which I have not, is that she's giving both Kylo Ren and Rey some interior life that I don't think could happen on the screen, because it's so much narration that I doubt they got to narrate this much in the screen. And I think giving them more interiority with art that's this good really helps them feel a lot fuller than they felt in the 15 minutes of the movie that I watched and bounced off of, but also probably much fuller than they could have been made to be on movie, because it just gives us more time with them internally. So I'm game for this. I hope to never watch the movie, but I really am interested in understanding why J.J. Abrams did what he did, and I will learn that from this comic book series. Superman number 23. This is written by Joshua Williamson and with art from Dan Mora, who's just everywhere. I think he's a little overworked because I don't think he really had his typical magic here. Also colored by Alejandro Sanchez and letters from Ariana Mayer. I was liking this Doomsday arc so much, and I just don't think that this issue quite paid it off super well. partially because I don't really like Dan Moore's Lois Lane. I just don't think he has a good likeness for her, and so she doesn't work for me as Superwoman Lois Lane. But also, it just felt like Williamson was building and building and building to this big moment with Doomsday, where he exists at different points in time, and why everybody's fighting over him. Last couple issues, I had me so hyped. I think this book was in my top 10 at some point, and it just didn't feel like it built to a big enough place. He kind of pulled a Bendis, where he didn't really do a climax. He just said, "Oh, and here's another thing that's going to happen. Let's roll on to the next arc." And I was like, but I was so excited to see this climax. It was so interesting. There were so many cool elements happening, and it just kind of didn't feel like it like got all the way there. So it wasn't bad. And Dan Moore art is always going to be pleasing to look at, but I just think that this arc felt like it was meant for something more. And then we didn't like quite get to the level of excitement that the past few issues had. Teenage Mutant Ninja Motherfucking Turtles. This issue blew me away. Jason Aaron writing, Juan Ferreira on art, letters from Sean Lee. This you could pick up here. Don't worry about the other 6 issues. If you just want to read something pleasing, this gives you, and it says new story arc begins here, but it gives you everything you need to know about where the turtles are without feeling like you missed anything. The art is so outrageously amazing. Like the way that he colors, the way that he shows them three-dimensional in the space, the way that he has them physically act so they're not just the same grinning face every time, the way he differentiates their physiques are so amazing. I love that the turtles are back together in New York, but they can't reconcile that they all have a different outlook on life now than they had before they splintered. And so they're all struggling to be their own version of a turtle, be their own version of a vigilante, and it doesn't marry up anymore. And they're getting increasingly frustrated with each other. It's just like when you're like trying to, like row a boat and one person is rowing at a different speed than the other, or one person is like rowing backwards and the other one's rowing forward. They can't move forward as a family. And that's what they are. And it's so frustrating them because their love is there, but they all think the other one is doing something wrong, which was such a great resonant beat. And then to use Donatello, who's really kind of like the odd man out right now, to try to bring them together. Everything worked about this. It was bloody and funny and action-filled and heartfelt in the way that a Ninja Turtles comic should be. To me, this achieves everything that makes Ninja Turtles great. It is absolutely recommendable. If you've always wondered, what are these characters like in the comics? I've never read a Ninja Turtles comic. Buy this issue. You will learn everything you need to learn, and you will be seeing art that is peerless on every single page. This was absolutely stunning. It catapulted this into my top 10. It is truly one of my most anticipated series right now. I never in my life thought I would say that I'm most looking forward to not 1, not 2, but 3 different Jason Aaron comics. But I think he just needed to get away from Marvel and have a fresh perspective, because everything he's doing in these books feels so new and fresh and different and full of heart in a way that I have not seen from him for many, many years. And this artwork, I mean, oh, and if you're saying Donatello looks a little skinny there, there's a reason. There's a story reason for him looking skinny. But just the art and the colors here, the fact that Juan Ferreira does his own art and colors himself and is able to achieve this. And I think he's the regular series artist, and he's going to alternate occasionally with other artists. This is peak comic making. I cannot communicate to you the level of excitement I got from reading this. And then they also have a Saturday Morning Adventures comic, which I did not read. I really wanted to read this, The Crow, Flesh and Blood, but then when I looked into it, I think it's just a reprint of an existing Crow series, which like I can make the time to read, but I don't need to read for the Pulse show. Toxic Avengers, or Avenger, singular. I find this comic book so charming in the same way that I find Ninja Turtles charming. But the thing is, this is a comic that is playing with all sorts of grossness, gross physical humor, people acting horribly, people being bullied, corporations taking over, aliens invading the planet, and it relishes in the filth of that. And I love that. Like, I don't like reading comics that are just about bad people being bad, where I'm supposed to like delight in them as a protagonist. Like, I don't want to watch Breaking Bad. That doesn't appeal to me. But wallowing in the filth of a filthy world, the piss and shit stained filth of a filthy world, and seeing how bad everybody is in it, and then seeing one person who's trying to do something good but probably can't do enough good. I love it. It's so messed up. It's so wrong, and it brings the end, the first arc, in such a great way. Look, I'm not going to tell you that this is like an amazing 5-star comic, but if you love indie comics from when they used to be weird and gross in the 80s and 90s, if you like that trauma humor, which came from Traumaville, which is where Toxic Avenger, came from in Trauma Films, like this has got that in spades, and it never punches down. It shows us people getting punched down on, but it always punches across or up in terms of who is the the butt of the joke. I think that James Finn Garner, or no, sorry, that was the backup story. I think that Matt Bors has done an amazing thing in bringing Toxic Avenger back. And I think Fred Harper as an artist here just drew so much sickening stuff that it just was so delightful. It's just really, really made me love it in a true, genuine, kind of grinning ear to ear kind of way. TVA, which has been in my top 10, it just slipped out, but I still really love it. It's written by Catherine Blair, who's one of the writers on season 2 of Loki, with art from Perry Perez doing what I think is Perry Perez's best art I've ever seen from him. This is a little bit of a middle chapter. It gets into the whodunit within the Time Variance Authority. So it's like plays these characters kind of all walking around in hallways, which maybe is a little bit less exciting than seeing them out in the field as we've seen them for the past couple of issues, which is part of what's really worked for me. But it kind of reminded me of Severance in a way. You can't get through a show without talking about Severance. And that it's like these super characters that all have other lives and other realities, but here they've got to just be office drones, even though they're still themselves and they're superheroes and they remember everything. They got to kind of play the game of being TVA agents, even though they can tell there's something bigger happening. And the TVA is like too much bureaucracy and too much secrecy to get there. And that beat just works for me so well. And the art is so good. So if you like a reality series, this is very much in the vein of Exiles. If you like Exiles, if you liked Loki season 2, if you like Deadpool and Wolverine, this will deliver all of those things that you like. And yes, that character in the blonde in the middle is Jimmy Hudson, Wolverine's son from the original Ultimate Universe. And yes, he is used well here. Okay, I think we're just going to roll to the end. We're so close to the end. And then I'm going to see your comics, and then maybe we'll take a drink, and then we'll do the song. If I can still talk by then. I was a little soft on Ultimate Spider-Man last month, because I said, if we're going to do a month at a time of story and how this skips a whole month at a time, the last issue left us on such a cliffhanger. Like, how are we're going to skip all the good stuff? Well, no, because Hickman does know what he's doing, and I should give him some more credit sometimes, because this only skips ahead 5 days, but that is the difference between January and March. So in those 5 days, some things have come to a head, and then we get to see all the action we got promised. So I was really afraid we were going to skip, but Hickman's playing with the pacing in a way. So here's my Marco Ciccato hair of this week. I mean, I'm not going to mess up my current hair because it's great, but that hair, that is what my hair looked like at the stream on Thursday. Love this beat with Black Cat and Peter Parker's son. So adorable. I love when Hickman writes teenagers and kids, and he writes them well. I think he's better at it than anybody gives him credit for. I like his writing there more than big Universal stuff, but also he writes some crackling action for Peter Parker out of costume in this little slice of the savage land beneath New York. It's really thrilling. It's really tense. Ciccato, whatever his name is. Of course, the art is easy to follow. Matthew Wilson's colors are incredible. It ends with like a really shocking development, and then also like a really shocking monologue from one of the Sinister Six. It made me realize everything I loved about this comic that I've kind of felt soft on for the past 3 months. It's back, baby. We're in year 2 and it's all happening. So I thought this issue was incredible. I'm back on its side. I hope that Hickman continues to show us significant moments like he did in this issue, because the past few issues have felt a little insignificant. And I want to get back to it being this much fun. If you're only going to show us a few minutes out of every month of time, pick the best minutes. I'm not reading Ultimate X-Men. It makes me too angry. I don't read Ultraman versus Avengers, because I tried some Ultraman a few years ago. It just wasn't my bag, so I'm not into it. I am into Uncanny Valley. This series has such a unique take. It's a little bit like Donny Cates' Crossover, if you remember that, where like people in the real world were crossing over with a comic book world. This is about people in the real world crossing over with a cartoon, a very Hanna-Barbera cartoon world, but they've interacted in the past, and it's because of their past interactions that they're crossing over. I will say, originally, I think this was tipped to just be 5 or 6 issues, and so we're into a second arc. I think it's going to 11 issues, 10 or 11 now, and you definitely can feel the Tony Fleecs kind of like scrambling to put together the second arc. I don't think it's as focused as the first arc. That said, the real story to me here is Dave Watcher on letters, because on art with Pat Brosso on letters, because we're seeing him do things that I didn't know that he could do. Dave Watcher is already one of my favorite comic artists. I loved him on Ninja Turtles. I loved him on Iron Fist Heart of the Dragon. He's incredible here, but he's doing this thing where he's drawing this cartoon world. I mean, these are obviously a riff on Smurfs, and he draws them in such a hilarious, cute, animated way. But then also we have our characters in the real world, sometimes side by side with characters from the cartoon world. And I love the way he's drawing them too. And none of them look like the style I've seen from him already. If you want to just read one issue of this that's going to like rip your face off, read issue number 6. It's a standalone issue at the end of the first arc that kind of unveils the big conceit of the story, but it works even if you read it as your number 1 and then go back. It just ripped my throat out. I wasn't violent. I don't know why it's ripping all these parts off of my body. It was just so shockingly, audaciously big-brained cool, and the art was executed so well, and Tony Fleek's script was so amazing that I'm like ride or die for this book now. Even if this issue was a little bit softer, I just love the concept of this kid who's part of our real world, but what happens when he gets pulled into a cartoon world? I love it. Like shades of Narnia, but also just shades of like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Absolutely love it. And I haven't seen anybody do anything like this since Kate's crossover, and crossover was specific to comics. This is very much about classic cartoons. And so, and Disney and Hanna-Barbera cartoons. I just love it so much. I want to read this goddamn comic book so bad. Rockabilly Vampiro Apocalypse. Every cover I see, I'm like, it's clearly campy, and I'm gonna love it. And it's not digital. I'm making a vow that I'm gonna try to find one of these creators on Meet online and see if I can get a review copy. I think we're a big enough deal here at the pull list here in Crushing Krisis that we at least could rate a review copy of Rockabilly Vampiro Apocalypse. So I'm doing it. I'm going after my dreams. Vicarious. This was the last issue of this series. I think it was mildly good. I think I can mildly recommend it. It's kind of a Matrix riff-ish, where basically somebody else can plug into your perspective and see through your eyes. And so how do those people get used? Do they get used as sex workers? Do they get used as, wild, adventurous people to go to highfalutin parties that you can't go to? I just think that it was a really, really smart script by Ryan Parrott. I don't know if Eleonora Carlini was the right interior artist, especially because these Dan Panosian covers were amazing. And I kind of found my own love for the interior art, but it was a little cartoony. It was almost near to Raleigh Rossmo's style, but maybe not quite as animated and distorted as his style, which wasn't always what I wanted. But I think this particular issue needed that. Remember, several lifetimes ago, I talked about Carlyle School of Kings delivering exactly what it promised and it not being satisfying. This delivered exactly what it promised in this issue, and it was satisfying. It tied up threads, it paid things off, but it twisted it just a little bit in a way that I didn't expect. And it made me say, you know what, this Ryan Parrott guy, he's got some good ideas. He does write for DC. I think he's one of the 2 writers of, the Atom Project right now? But it made me really think, like, you know what, this was a cool idea that he's had for a long time. He executed it well. And even if it didn't like totally thrill me in the way the first issue did, it managed to resolve in a way that I really appreciated. And that made me totally willing to read more stuff from him, because I can see that he can deliver. And to me, that's really important. Seeing somebody at the end of a series be able to like pay it off and make me feel like I got into this indie series and I didn't waste my time. And so it's really good when I can see this. I was going to read Warm Fusion. I don't know who Scott Hoffman and Alberto. I do know Alberto Ponticelli. I don't know Scott Hoffman. But I noticed that this team is all male, to my knowledge, creators. And I looked at the solicits and what people wrote about the first issue, and it was about sex workers getting murdered. And of course, they're female sex workers. I don't do that anymore. If you have an all-male creative team and you want to murder some sex workers, you got to murder male sex workers. I will not read your book if you're an all-male creative team and it's about punishing and abusing and murdering female sex workers. I'm drawing a line. You can either find a woman to be on your creative team or just write about male sex workers. West Coast Avengers. I thought this comic was catastrophically bad. Let's talk about it. This artist on the first issue did such a great job. Danny Kim. Loved it so much. It had this very funny, almost Steve Lieber quality to it. The more and more Duggan pushes him to do action, the more and more incoherent his page layouts get. And his art, too. His art didn't look like this. It's the same artist, same colorist, but it didn't look like this in issue 1. Let's talk about why this page doesn't work. It's trying to show us quick slices of action, right? Trying to show us that these things are happening in quick succession. But what is the relation of these panels to each other? That first slice of panel is Ultron looking at this big thing that's been brought here by a member of the Phalanx, but it's so zoomed in that we can't even see what he's seeing, and it doesn't really imply speed or things happening fast to me. Then we zoom out, and this panel that's like on a raked angle to lead my eye away off the page, but then the action in the panel is going in the opposite direction of the rake. What are you trying to get me to do with my eye here? We're not seeing anything that's bringing those beams in from the left, and the panel's growing off to the right, so it feels like it's fighting for which way to steer my attention. Why is it all on black? And why is it raked like that? Why can't we just have 2 standard panels? What are we achieving here? That black marries into the black on Ultron's back here, but there's no reason that it should marry. Then we get this middle panel that finally zooms us a little bit back further on Ultron, but then based on that panel above, can you even tell why he would still be standing there? It doesn't seem like that matches up to before. And then what do we get again with this black on the bottom with 2 standard inset panels? So what is the page trying to tell us with these panels at the top that are crazy angles when the page is angled, the panels at the bottom are not at crazy angles, but that Iron Man shot there is raked at a crazy angle, but it's in a standard square panel. I'll tell you what's happening. Danny Kim's not good enough artist to carry this kind of a page off. If there's no motivation for your paneling looking like this, just don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do the paneling. It made no sense. But this was not just this one page. It was, the issue was littered with this. My eye could not tell where to go. I couldn't understand what the speed of what was happening. The idea of space connoting importance was turned on its head because I couldn't tell what was supposed to be important. It made me very, very frustrated. I think Jerry Dugan is telling it, and again, this page, what is happening here? Why do we have 4 panels that are offset like this? I could see if we were having a conversation between 2 characters and this was almost trying to emulate a 2-shot in a movie where we were going over the shoulder of each character, bouncing back and forth. And it starts with that but we're looking at Tony, but then the angle we're looking at Ultron is not the same angle we're looking at Tony. I should see a little bit of Tony's shoulder looking over to see Ultron, but then we zoom out to the 2-shot and then we zoom out even wider to see an even wider shot. So why was the page paneled like this? So this was the other Pat Shand comic that really got me interested because I see a lady with a crazy color of hair and I see a dragon bursting out of the sea and I'm like, I'm going to buy your comic. But I didn't know anything about it and it was late in my polls because it was all the way at the end of the alphabet. So I didn't get to read it. But I have read other stuff I like from Pat Shand, including Destiny New York. So I think I might check this out. Wild Wisps #3. Look, if the interior art is anything like this cover, I'm going to love it. And if the interior art's not like the cover, then I'm going to get angry. And it doesn't seem like it's just a titty book because her breasts are totally covered. So it can't possibly be all about titties, right? Okay. You have to understand, I would never say the word titty out of the context of this stream. It's an in-joke with myself about seeing books with female protagonists that are scantily clad and trying to decide if the book is going to be about the woman or about her breasts. I think we have 2 more. Oh, this was hard to get through. I know you've heard me give a version of this speech before, but if you're going to do a special celebration month issue, Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride, and you're saying we're only going to let creators work on it that are creators that identify with that in some way, it doesn't do you any favor if you pick creators who aren't good enough to be on your main comics yet and you're using this as an audition book. It makes it feels like they're in a ghetto, and it also makes me think, oh, well, I clearly would never buy comics from these creators because they're so bad at their job. Why would you sell me a tryout book from creators you're not faithful enough? A book like this should be by creators who are your powerhouse creators that are like amazing. But so it had a first story from Stephanie Phillips about Shanna the She-Devil that was tragically bad, which we've already seen that Stephanie Phillips is not working out at Marvel. Then we had a middle story from Sherry Dimmoline that just was written so terribly, and it was with Daredevil and Wolverine, meaning Elektra and X-23. So why would you not get Erica Schultz, one of your women writers who's great, to write that story? And then the third one from Allison Sampson that stripped the story didn't make a lot of sense, but I am convinced that Alan Sampson is an amazing penciler because she wrote the story and did the pencils. So this is the first set of pencils from the Stephanie Phillips story by Frederica Muzzo. It was okay. I didn't get too excited about it. Then this is the second story, pencils by Kelsey Ramsey. It just didn't feel ready for Marvel primetime. Like, I do like that kind of scratchy, dissolving in the wind style of color, of art and colors, but I just feel like that's not Marvel style, and you're not going to like convince me that you're a great Marvel artist. However, this art from Allison Sampson on the third story, colored by Chris Peter, this made me say I'll go and buy a comic by Allison Sampson. So I just don't know why you would showcase a story that's not good by creators who are not ready for primetime. And I also don't know why you would center it mostly on X-23 and Daredevil, who both have their own solo comics, which are barely staying alive, and also have just been in the same comic together in Laura's comic. Like, I don't understand editorially why you would put this together. It seems really like Bush League amateur. And this is from somebody who loves my women characters, who loves my women and non-binary creators, who wants to read comics by them. But you got to give me something that feels like it's worth buying and reading. This felt insulting to me as a reader. DC does it too. Do people enjoy these things? I feel like there was a period a few years ago when we really got into these anthology comics where like they really did have really cool, really great creators on them. And it did make me excited. And I just look at the whole span of indie comics that we've just been been through on this one stream. I'm like, this is the best set of creators. And then also the bait and switch of having this title. I mean, or this cover, I guess all these characters. No, was Echo even in it? I don't even remember if Echo was in it now. I just feel like I don't understand who it was for or what it was trying to achieve. Finally, we come to Jed MacKay's X-Men with art from Netho Diaz that was remarkably great, with colors from Ferris Fuentes Sojo. This was fun. I love Alpha Flight. I love X-Men. I love this comic book. It was just a fun, lightweight comic where the team has a fight. It was very polished. It used all the characters well. They were on voice and let me know who Alpha Flight was. Let me know who Alpha Flight was and was consistent to their characters and their history without making me feel mired in it. The action was fun. Netho Diaz is very quickly turning into my favorite magic artist. Look at the, like, she's muscular here. She's thick and powerful, but she still is scantily clad. And if you're into that kind of thing, you are. But like, look at the muscles. Look at her abs. Look at how thick her legs are. And then look at how specifically he draws her face in a much more specific way than Ryan Stegman draws her face. I just had a lot of fun with it. It was a really good, fun, lightweight action X-Men issue, which an X-Men flagship should be able to do. And honestly, it also works as a backdoor pilot for Alpha Flight. So it's a backdoor pilot for Alpha Flight. It gave us some Shi'ar nonsense, which maybe is going to connect to Imperial. Who knows? It gave us like a brood ship. We love seeing that, a little slice of continuity. It just succeeded in everything it was out there needing to do. I think Jed MacKay's X-Men is doing its best work when it stays away from the unbelievably heavy, lugubrious story of like resurrection, post-resurrection infection and Orcus or whatever. It's been 3 hours of talking, y'all. But my point is, Jed MacKay's good at fun comic books, so just let him write a fun X-Men comic book. It will generate its own interest in the rest of the line if he keeps writing something as fun as this has been. I think we made it. So glad we made it. Look how far we come now, baby. Okay. I'm going to put on my glasses. I'm going to catch up on your comments. We're already past the 3-hour mark, so we got to play a song and get the heck out of here. Tim Burton really dug Fraction's Iron Man run as well. The dog dragged me outside, so not catching up on the Iron Man discussion as Peter gets to the comics. Okay, comments, drink again. Lance McNair, main problem with MCU humor is when it undercuts dramatic, heartfelt moments. Completely agreed. Kyle the Mighty saying DC animated Joker was heavily based on Bronze Age Joker, and that's my Joker. Logan Wayne says, am I still doing a scheduled AMA, or are we just dropping questions in the chat? You know, AMA used to be at the top, and it was at the top. We had a brief AMA at the top. I think when it goes this long, we can't AMA again at the end. Maybe that will start to be like another show or Patreon exclusive. I don't know. But at the point that there were 60 plus comics in the poll, I just can't. I can't do it all at once. Okay. Let's see. A lot of talk about the Downey Jr. humor, which Hank, I think, makes a good point, is very similar to Quick Gilmore Girl dialogue from Amy Sherman Palladino, which of course owes also a debt to Quick Joss Whedon dialogue. It's no mistake, of course, that Joss Whedon consulted on and then ultimately did write several of the Marvel films. That's all part of kind of the same thing. James Kill, Pop Kill #1, which I did not read. James Abel says, I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. Who knew Soda Business had a James Bond or agent working for them? See, that sounds interesting to me, but Palmiotti has scared me off with all the violence against women. I just can't get excited. Scriptured says, I have to catch up on past streams to hear my opinion on Batgirl, then I love to hear my the art is amazing. The art is some of the best art on any DC book. I just think Tate Brombell, again, space denotes importance. He has given 4 issues to the same walk through the train as like nothing else has happened. I think you should have been able to get that done in an issue or 2. Ryan Wilson hated Love and Thunder. It squandered the best Marvel storyline of the past 10 years. Oh, I'll get too angry. I don't trust Gunn either, Ryan Wilson. I think the first Guardians movie was amazing, and I think it was largely amazing because Nicole Perlman co-wrote it, because the other 2 Guardian movies were, well, I haven't watched 3. 2 was fine, but it didn't have the heart that 1 did, because turns out Gunn didn't bring the heart. He never had a heart to begin with. Okay. Baldy and Power Girl, better than Baldy and X Factor? Yes. And Baldy and X Factor was like 1,000% level up from anything we'd seen from him previously. Power Girl feels even a little more glossy and refined. I don't think he has as much room to do interesting things on Power Girl, because X Factor had that it was in Krakoa and you could do data pages and stuff that were wild. But I think style-wise, it's a clear lateral level up on Power Girl. Ryan Wilson, we're told he's this big comic book fan, but look at everything he's done. It's pretty far from the comics. Talking about Gunn. Yeah, I agree. Then a lot of people were talking about guns. Scriptured has been reading Knights. I think you might have been the one who told me before that you kept up with it when I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to keep up with it. You say, I love how the Knights issues all come with a Spotify playlist. Oh, I missed that. Such a great vibe and really speaks to me. It really feels like the creative team are millennial anime and gamer nerds, and I feel loved. Yeah, I had that sense from the first issue that it was something really special and magical, and that it was like it was not them, it was me. It was a me problem. So I'm really happy that I went back and tried another issue, and now I'm actually excited to catch up on it. Now that I see that they've done something interesting with it, it's worth it for me if I've got to slog through a couple of early issues, because I see that there's a vision. Ryan Wilson, I can't believe how big the Radiant Black universe has gotten. So many Massiverse comics, and in my opinion, it's nothing special, just the Power Rangers rip off. The thing that I think it did well is right off the bat, it said, look, we're going to do all these color comics. They're going to be easily identifiable as our comics, but we're going to do them with different creators, and they're going to have different vibes. One of them is going to be more kaiju. One of them is going to be more Power Rangers. One of them is going to be more alternate universes. I think that was good marketing. I think they're better at marketing than comic making. Lance and Canary, I'm starting to think that I'm not talking more about Gunn. I'm so happy you're talking to each other about Gunn. It seems like you're having a really great conversation. I don't remember saying his name, so this is all on you. Ryan Wilson has Thunderbolt Ross been dead for a while. I forget if he was still dead or if he came back to life by the end of Immortal Hulk. I do not recall, but he's alive now. Kyle the Mighty, for people agreeing on more about Gunn. Okay. As someone who's recently read a lot of Bronze and 80s Marvel, I realize how many great characters had their story changed for the worse in Gunn. I can't get away from the James Gunn comics. Well, I'm happy to know it's not just me. I feel like for a while he was so popular that me expressing that I felt like he had such a cynical and like not heartfelt view of Marvel, people were like, how could you say that? He's so great. Didn't you see Guardians? I'm like, yeah, I saw Guardians 1. It wasn't written entirely by him. Now I feel like people have seen enough of a range of Gunn stuff on enough characters that they know well, that you're realizing that he's got a very specific kind of humor. And it is very funny, but I don't think it's always the right humor, which is why I'm a little suspicious of him as like the chief of the whole DC line. Tim Burnham talking about Roberto De La Torre on Conan. That's who's doing Shadowland era D&D art that Mark Cicchetto filled in for when he was first working on DD back then. I did not remember that De La Torre has been around for that long. He has such a vibe. His art, it's like straight from the 70s. So cool. Ryan Wilson, I don't think I've ever seen someone say they loved a Frank Thierry comic. People are really warming up to the Sabretooth book, and I think it was making an interesting promise in issue number 2. I just don't think it managed to keep that promise. Bernie Lockhart, off topic. What's been my favorite issue of North Fantastic Four so far? I will name 3. I loved issue number 7, where Doom comes to the house to visit them and plays Rachmaninoff on the piano. It was either 10, 11, or 12, where it's a spaceship that is being haunted, but really they're just seeing the Fantastic Four from their own perspective. And 25, the unbearably sexy issue with Johnny Storm. Honorable mention to the first of the 2 Blood tie-in issues, which I think had the best use of Mr. Fantastic's powers we've seen in like decades. I ain't got time for that, Peter, as he reads every comic in existence. Ryan, not every comic. I don't see any Rippaverse comics. I mean, James Abel, Sentinels 5. This horrible series is done. I hope to never see the characters again. Oh, great. We had a glimpse into the future. But Rippaverse ships his book out on time. That's what matters the most, right? No, we stand late comics here because it means I have less to read. I get it. 4 seasons. 4 sisters. I get it. Remender is so clever. Yeah, that's exactly where I am on it. Ryan reacting to how much I hated Sentinels. Tiger Eyes, Sentinels book of it. Do you like it? How dare you, sir? Do you actually like Sentinels? Kyle the Mighty wasn't really interested in reading Sentinels, but now I'm curious if it's really that bad. But the thing is, some people are liking it. They're just people that I'm never going to be friends with. No, we can still be friends. That's just the thing that I say. RAP Sentinels, damn Krisis. Tell us what I really feel. Okay, Ryan Wilson, I think, had to go, or I scared him away. Or no, Lance had to go away. Anyway, that's me canceling the Sentinels trade pre-order. Thanks for saving me some money. Look, you might still like it. Just because I didn't like it doesn't mean nobody's going to like it. Some people out there are saying it's their people are saying. Anyway, Jody Hauser is trying to save a bad movie. I agree. It's amazing how bad the new trilogy was. It had so many good ideas inside of it, Ryan, but like, in execution, I don't know if it just needed more time to bake or people that were going to be allowed to take more chances. I actually do enjoy elements of Last Jedi, but even Last Jedi had those problems as well. Popping back in just to say the Rise of Skywalker is the worst Star Wars movie ever. Okay, bye. Mic drop from Lance. Lance and I have very similar feelings about Star Wars. I heard people say the art was amazing in that TMT issue. Ryan, you don't even know how amazing. The problem with the sequel trilogy is there's no, what the, I got something in my mouth, was that there's no cohesive plan and 3 very different directors. So we got 2 very good and very different movies, and then they tried to reconcile them and couldn't. Perfectly said. TVA 3 still feel like there are too many characters and looks like we're getting another one to cliffhanger. All right, that's fair. Hank, Juan Ferrer is amazing. Your gritty colors look great. He was so good in that. What was it? Creepy crawlies, the web crawling, spine tingling Spider-Man. Amazing. Ultimate Spider-Man 4, love the black cat design. Very good issue, but we all know so-and-so didn't get killed. Or did he? Was it Mysterio? I don't know. Felt like in 13 it really started to hit. Looking forward to 14. Maybe that was about Ultimate Spider-Man. James did read Ultimate X-Men. Love Peach and Mocha's art, but I couldn't tell you what happened during this issue. That's how I feel about all of it. Chris Brogan saying you might have to check out the Toxic comic. Apparently, if you enjoyed the movie, the comic will sell you on it. I thought maybe you just like shit and piss since I kept talking about those things. George Chimchimov saying Ultimate Spider-Man, there's a great shot of adrenaline to the book. Yeah, I agreed. Best issue since issue 6. Nailed it. Doubt what happened to Harry was real, but the fact that it was shocking matters. Like, we know it's comics and things get reversed, but in that moment was very real. James Abel, Uncanny Valley number 8. While running away from the killing crows, you run into the Smurfs, but you must embrace your inner self and become the one with the cartoons to find your way. As always, James Abel is a poet. Logan Wade, what are my thoughts or feelings on the forthcoming Hush number 2? Well, I'll be reading it. I like Hush. I don't always love Jeff Loeb, but I think Jeff Loeb does a particular thing well, which is kind of like that very Long Halloween, very Hush model of like, hey, I'm going to put a lot of individual things together here and string a story together, but each piece will feel like an individual piece of the puzzle. I think he's masterful at that. So if Hush is going to be structured similar to the original Hush, then I think it's really going to work. Do I think we need more Hush? Am I excited for more Hush? I don't know if I could say that, but I think Jim Lee, unfortunately, is just not the artist that he was. And I know he has problems with his eyesight now, so I don't want to come down hard on him. He's a legend, but I just don't know if you're going to ever achieve the heights of the original Hush. Uncanny X-Men, George Chimchov says the best issue of the series. Can't wait for the next issue. Well, I eventually will catch up on it. I think once it's all on Marvel Unlimited, it's making me too angry to purchase it and have spent money on it. Scriptured, do I have a list somewhere of my current top 10 reads? It was at the beginning of the show. It's the first thing I did. It's in the first minute. No, it's fine that you're a new viewer. I love it. Welcome aboard. We love to have you here in the Crushers. I don't know. We're still workshopping it. Yeah, but at the top of every show, I talk about what my top 10 is. And so should I put that on Crushing Krisis? I'm struggling with Crushing Krisis. Posts take a long time. I preview all the books that are coming out in the coming week, and they take between 2 and 5 hours to do each of those posts because I also update all of the guides for all of the comics in each of those posts. So by the time we get to after the show on a Monday, I'm like exhausted and I'm already behind on the next week's post. So I don't do like a recap of my top reads or anything. But if you guys would read that stuff on Crushing Krisis, I would do it. I just feel like this is where it's going to get seen more. So I tend to do it here. It's alarming the amount of books I've mentioned in the last couple of weeks that feature the murder and abuse of sex workers. It's just a go-to plot. It's a go-to like, ooh, look how creepy we're being plot. And it really upsets me, especially when it's always men. Like, not that women should have like special powers to write creepier comics than men, but when you're a man, and it's this interesting thing. It made me think of a thing in the news this week. I won't go too political, but it's actually about a Democrat being an asshole. About Rahm Emanuel was basically speaking out that trans people should not use the restrooms of their gender, especially if they're in high school. And it's a high school person saying like, hey, I'm a trans girl. I would like to use the women's restroom. Because Rahm Emanuel basically said, I wish I could have been a boy in high school and said I was a girl to go to the girls' bathroom. And that mindset basically is telling on yourself, saying like, if I was allowed to do pervy stuff, I would lie and cheat to do pervy stuff. And it's cheating on you to say that that's the worst thing you can imagine anybody doing, because it's the thing you want to do. And I feel the same way about when an all-male writing team always does violence against women, or especially as violence against sex workers, even if they get turned into the vampires or the monsters or whatever, it makes me in my mind kind of go like, oh, I get it. You think the most like transgressive ooh kind of thing you can think of is murdering sex workers. That tells me something. I think that tells me something about who you are. Especially if I see you do it in multiple books, it's just a strange thing for a man to always, what is that saying he thinks about the value of sex workers or the value of women or the value of showing violence against women or what kind of women deserve violence? The fact that it's a go-to plot point, I think I can't help but pathologize that. I think if it's one, like if Brian Bendis does it one time in one comic book, Brian Bendis' whole oeuvre isn't about that. But I'm starting to get the sense that for certain comic writers, their whole oeuvre is about that. And so I'm like, oh. Okay. Yeah, it seems like everybody hated Women of Marvel. Hated Women of Marvel. She-Devils, ugh, it was hard to follow. I tried Women of Marvel. I really tried. I just couldn't enjoy it. Yikes. Tiger Eyes thinks I hit my titty limit. I'll just go every time I say titty instead of titty. See, I said it. Chris Brogan loves Destiny New York. Yeah, I only read 5 or 6 issues, and I keep meaning to go back and read more of it. I really, really liked it. James Abel was also sold on Alpha Flight after that X-Men issue. Tiger Eyes went away and read Jump Scare while I've been streaming. Nice start, clean art. I'll give it a shot next month. Love it, love it, love it. Jean-Remy Argueta is loving Nights, so I'm happy. This is why I like having all of your feedback. Sometimes I jump to a rash conclusion or I'm missing on something and you all tell me about it, and then I go back and give it a chance, and it turns out that my initial instinct that it was something I might love might be great. Brain Tissue Paper says, I think McKay's X-Men has ended up being the best of the From the Ashes. I think it's gotten better and better as he's gotten away from the mutant misery porn, and it's just been about like fun X-Men stories, because that's what he's good at. That's what he's good at. Apparently I said something funny, according to Pittyma, who will know. What were 2 good Star Wars sequel movies? I think elements of the first one were good, and I think Last Jedi was very stylish in a way that I want to see Star Wars movies push the envelope, make me mad, do things that piss me off, and then they got too scared of the fan response and they just reverted to mean. Can't believe haven't joined the stream before, but it's so great to see her, ass. I'm so used to talking to you on Near Mint Condition and Omnidog. Feel like I have enough energy to run a marathon now. Well, hopefully Sam has been listening this through her whole run. Oh, Joey Richards, I love you. It's so great to see you here, pal. And Brooke Cassidy, it's weird that I just said men do this. Men do it. I hope I didn't misgender anybody by mistake, but I'm talking about how men say that they think that they would use these things for nefarious reasons, and so they assume that trans women are doing it for nefarious reasons. It's not weird that I'm saying it. Men telling themselves. It's the whole Republican Party platform. James Abel, will my show be at the same time next week or different due to daylight savings? I don't know yet. I haven't figured it out. I want to keep it at around a consistent time for you, but I can't do it much earlier than this for me, so it might be an hour later last week. Or next week. Okay. What is some Bendis best work outside of popular runs? Well, I don't know a lot of indie Bendis. I might be too brain dead to answer that question well for you, James. I might have to punt it to next week. I mean, what's a Bendis run that I like? I know they exist because I'm not like an all around hater. I don't know. I'm too brain dead. We're going to have to come back next week. Okay. So I have my guitar plugged in through an amp this time, which may or may not be a good idea because it might just blow out the microphone, but I just thought it would help with how twinkly the guitar always is sounding. So this is a song, real funny story. Oh boy. Okay. I wrote this on the Channel between Paris and France, the one time I ever went to France. And I didn't have a piano or guitar. I didn't have a travel guitar at that point. So I just kept repeating it to myself, and I wrote it actually on my Channel ticket. And then I was in London still without a piano or a guitar. And so I just remembered. And then I got home and I sat at the piano and I had worked it out so perfectly in my head that it worked. So I've been wanting to play, oh boy. I've been wanting to play an alternate tuning song for you. And this is an alternate tuning song because that's a lot of my bread and butter. So thank you so much for sticking around. I will be on Near Mint Condition later this week on Thursday, doing Marvel Solicits. Also next week, I believe we're going to be doing a Map My Ex, but we don't know who yet, which is kind of concerning because I have to start mapping. And otherwise, I don't think I'm on anything else this week. My Omnidog's Vault appearance will be next week. And so please, if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe, but most importantly, tell somebody you know who might appreciate this about Crushing Comics or about CrushingKrisis.com or about this channel, because then that really helps me. And of course, there's a Patreon if you would like to support. So this is called, oh no, I opened the wrong song. I'm looking at the lyrics. I'm like, these are not the lyrics to the song I said I was going to play. Hold on. Okay. So this is called Saving Grace, and it is about France, sort of. Sanctified by your crisp lines. Oh, let me try that again. Sanctified by your crisp lines and the same black shoes worn by all those other dudes. Are you really happy being another face in the queue? You've been transformed into what you scorned, and yet you justify what you once despised. Weren't you the one who warned me don't sell out to survive? Funny how your best laid plans got compromised, and all the women pray on the Champs-Elysees, the veils drawn like curtains, frozen in place. They're all waiting in line for the saving grace. So if your soul's worth saving, you better start saving today. Heaven knows I'm predisposed to breaking the rules, to playing the fool. Never satisfied unless you got something to prove. The apocalypse is on all our lips, and you're still trying to choose a winning side. I wonder what was so important about being right. I wonder if your satisfaction keeps you warm at night. And all the women pray on the Champs-Elysees, the veils drawn like curtains, frozen in place. They're all waiting in line for the saving grace. So if the soul's worth saving, you better start saving today. You save your faith like pennies for a rainy day, but after inflation, faith's not worth what you paid. What you pay, and all the women pray. So this was an actual thing when I was visiting Paris. On the Champs-Elysees, there'd be these women in like veils, and they'd be doing the pietà, like they'd be on the ground praying and begging, and they were just everywhere. And I had nothing, it's not like that was in the guidebooks or anything or explained to me. So I was kind of like, what is this? Is it some kind of performance art? But no, it's just like a particular style of begging, I suppose, and it really stuck with me. And then also made me think about the apocalypse for some reason. My band that I used to be in, Toxic Krisis, we wrote a lot of songs about like the apocalypse and the end of the world. Really, it's my co-writer who mostly wrote them. So this was like me finally dipping my toe into the apocalypse. All the women pray on the Champs-Elysees, the veils drawn like curtains, frozen in place. They're all waiting in line for the saving grace. So if your soul's worth saving, you better start saving today. If you still know how, you better fold your hands and pray. 'Cause if your soul's worth saving, you better start saving today. I get confused because that song is in the tuning C-A-D-G-C-C, which means something that usually would be a minor. The shape would be E minor. It is not minor. Here it is minor. So, and here it is major. So I always get a little confused when I play it in alternate tunings, but that is called Saving Grace. And this has been Crushing Krisis. And thank you for sticking around, especially if you stuck around through the song. I really appreciate that. I'll be back next week, maybe at the same time, maybe at an hour earlier later. We'll see, because daylight savings is a mystery. But until then, be well, treat people well in the world, give everybody the attention and the respect that they deserve. Trans rights are human rights, and so are women's rights, and so are the rights of everybody on this planet. So let's all appreciate the rights and help preserve them for everyone. Everybody have a great week, and I will see you next time.